Chapter 257 Yuan Tong's Terrifying Strength. My Grand Qin Empire will guarantee your safety. It wasn't Bai Qi that said this, and it was Li Si instead. Li Si gazed at Yang Yi and said, If you're able to obtain the first and are willing to join my Grand Qin Empire, then my empire will guarantee your safety. Moreover, it'll foster you with great effort. Of course, the precondition is obtaining the first. Yang Yi smiled, and he didn't say anything as he turned around and left. The price the Grand Qin Empire was willing to pay was slightly insufficient. So long as he obtained the first, then it represented that he, Yang Yi, could defeat the future martial god. At that time, he believed that numerous powers would stand out to protect him. It was even to the extent that so long as he was willing, even the Origin School would open its doors to him. If Yang Yi merely wanted to stay alive, then wouldn't it be an extremely simple task? All he had to do was hide in the Grand Myriad Mountains. With the little fellow by his side, could anyone do anything to him? However, Yang Yi's objective wasn't to merely stay alive, and it was to rescue his mother instead. If he wanted to rescue his mother, then he was bound to have to go against the Colossus, the Flower Palace. Would these powers fight the Flower Palace to the death for his sake? The answer was a definite no. In the end, it always came down to the same conclusion. He had to depend on himself for everything. As he gazed at Yang Yi's back, Bai Qi said in a low voice, This kid isn't bad. But he's just unable to let go of his mother. It's truly quite a pity. It is quite a pity. Li Si spoke in a light voice. How ruthless of Yang Yi! Had clearly obtained victory, yet he still killed Lin Xiuran. Such character is truly ruthless and cruel to the extreme. Exactly. Lin Xiuran had already fallen unconscious, but he still refused to let Lin Xiuran go. When compared to Yuan Tong's kindness and righteousness, Yang Yi is as ruthless and vicious as the members of the Ghost Sect. No, even the members of the Ghost Sect aren't as ruthless and vicious as him. Humph. Just wait and see. Yuan Tong will teach him a lesson sooner or later. After 2 hours passed, a new arena had appeared once more on the square, and a new battle began. Because Lin Xiuran had chosen Yang Yi, so it was naturally a battle between Yuan Tong and Ling Xinran. On the arena, Yuan Tong had his hands behind his back as he gazed at Ling Xinran, and he said, Amongst the profounders that participated in this year's Ascension ranking, there are only a few that I take seriously. You're one of them. I hope you don't disappoint me. I won't. Ling Xinran was sparing with her words. Yuan Tong nodded lightly and said, Make your move. Ling Xinran raised her hands slightly, and then the profound energy within her body instantly started surging. Suddenly, a strand of coldness appeared here. Some profounders that were comparatively closer to the arena instantly felt a strand of coldness assault them, and they couldn't help but shudder before hurriedly retreating a few meters back. At this moment, as Ling Xinran's hands moved incessantly, the energy within her body started to seethe and surge like boiling water. Circle after circle of pure white and seemingly material ripples swept out incessantly from her, and then numerous white specks appeared around her. It was the air and the surroundings that had frozen. What a genius! She actually cultivated the Snow Palace's 1,000 Leagues of Snow technique to such a level. As expected of the most monstrous genius in the young generation of the Snow Palace. In the future, shall absolutely be able to become a formidable existence like the Ice Maiden. On the walls of the Imperial Palace, Qin Yunzi praised as he gazed at Ling Xinran. Kai Feng grunted coldly, but she strangely didn't refute this because Ling Xinran really was an extremely monstrous genius. On the arena, Yuan Tong was still standing proudly on the spot while allowing Ling Xinran to accumulate strength. Such composure caused the countless profounders below the arena to be filled with extreme adoration. At a certain moment in time, Ling Xinran suddenly slapped her hands towards the space in front of her. 1,000 leagues of snow! Along with this fierce shout from Ling Xinran, a strand of pure white energy suddenly swept out from her hands. As soon as the pure white energy appeared, the spot where she stood was instantly frozen by ice. Moreover, the ice was spreading at an extremely swift speed. In less than the time of a single breath, around 30 m, and Ling Xinren's surroundings was covered in ice. Of course, more terrifying than this was that snow had actually started to descend from the sky above the arena. When the ice stretched out and arrived 1.5 m before Yuan Tong, he slowly clenched his hands that were kept behind his back, and then he stomped lightly with his right foot to instantly propel his figure up into the sky. However, the ice that was stretching towards him seemed as if it had eyes, and it actually pursued Yuan Tong. Moreover, it was extremely swift and had instantly arrived beneath Yuan Tong's feet. After that, Yuan Tong's feet were instantly frozen, and in less than half a breath of time, Yuan Tong's entire body was sealed within ice. The countless spectators in the surroundings were dumbstruck when they witnessed this scene. Yuan Tong has lost just like that? Right when this thought had just arisen in their minds, a light cracking sound resounded abruptly from the arena. After that, everyone saw numerous fine cracks starting to appear on the hard ice that sealed Yuan Tong. After a breath of time passed, a bang resounded as the hard ice that covered Yuan Tong had instantly exploded into pieces. In the air, Yuan Tong raised his leg, and then he suddenly descended like he weighed 1,000 kilograms. After that, he swiftly stomped his right leg onto the arena that was covered in ice. Bang! The entire arena trembled violently. After that, under the astounded gazes of the spectators, the hard ice that covered the entire arena had exploded into pieces and transformed into countless bits. After he destroyed Ling Xinren's combat technique, he lowered his head to gaze at his slightly red and swollen fists, and then he said, "A pretty good earth rank technique. If it was slightly strong, then I'm afraid even I wouldn't be able to destroy it with such ease. Utilize your strongest trump card, otherwise you wouldn't have an opportunity once I made a move. You ought to be clearly aware that I'm not boasting." As she gazed at the bits of ice that covered the entire ground, Ling Xinran took a deep breath, and then she stopped hesitating and gently stretched out her fair hand. In an instant, the snowflakes that drifted through the air above the arena had suddenly stopped descending, and they'd frozen in midair. Ling Xinran lightly spun her hand, and then those frozen snowflakes had suddenly started to spin swiftly. In an instant, sharp whistle that caused a chill to run down the spines of others resounded through the air above the arena. It's the Snow Palace's high-grade Earth rank combat technique, Snowflake Annihilation. Supposedly, the requirements to cultivate this technique are extremely harsh. Not only does it require the person cultivating it to possess water element profound energy, that person must possess the Ice Jade physique. It's exactly because of these two harsh requirements that besides that extraordinary expert who created this technique, no one else in the history of the Snow Palace was able to cultivate it successfully. I never expected that Ling Xinran would have actually cultivated it successfully. Murong Yao spoke in a low voice while she stood by Yan Ye's side. Yan Yi nodded lightly, and then he said, "The energy contained within those snowflakes are extremely terrifying, and ordinary profounders would probably be unable to resist a single flower. Since Wen Yu is equally famous to Ling Xinran, I presume she definitely possesses some sort of shocking combat technique as well. If she hadn't admitted defeat, then I would have probably had to experience a difficult battle with her. I haven't asked you this until now, but why did Wen Yu admit defeat?" Murong Yao turned to gaze at Yan Yi as she asked this question. Yan Yi laughed bitterly and said, "Truthfully speaking, I'm very puzzled as well." Murong Yao glanced at him, and then she stopped questioning him and turned around to look towards the arena. On the arena, Yuan Tong revealed a wisp of a solemn expression for the first time. Even he had no choice but to take a high-grade Earth rank technique seriously. Of course, it was mainly because Ling Xinran had cultivated it to a certain extent. This time, Yuan Tong didn't dare be careless, and the profound energy within his body surged towards his right palm. Right at this moment, Ling Xinran suddenly pushed her hand lightly towards Yuan Tong, and she shouted softly at the same time, "Go!" As soon as her voice resounded in the air, the countless snowflakes in the surroundings had instantly shot explosively towards Yuan Tong in a dense expanse. Every single snowflake was to cause a sharp whistle to resound through the air. The countless sharp whistles resounded incessantly in the surroundings, causing it to be extremely uncomfortable for innumerable profounders below the arena. It was even to the extent that blood had started to pour out from the ears of some profounders who were comparatively closer to the arena. They were horrified by this scene, and they hurriedly retreated swiftly. On the arena, Yuan Tong's eyes narrowed slightly. When the dense expanse of snowflakes arrived 3 m away from him, Yuan Tong flipped his palm so that it faced downward. In the next moment, he pressed it forward as he said, "Heaven split palm!" As soon as his voice resounded, an enormous palm formed from energy appeared out of thin air in front of Yuan Tong, and then it blasted towards the dense expanse of snowflakes. Space shook everywhere it passed, and the imposing aura it emanated made it seem like it could even split the heavens. Murong Yao's expression instantly became solemn when she saw Yuan Tong execute this combat technique. At that day on Ascension Mountain Range, Yuan Tong had utilized this exact technique to instantly annihilate a few dozen king-rank dark beasts. Will Ling Xinren's snowflake annihilation be able to resist Yuan Tong's attack? It wasn't just Murong Yao who had a solemn expression, Yan Ye's expression was solemn as well. Besides, because of the terrifying might this earth-rank technique revealed, his expression was solemn because of the speed Yuan Tong had executed it at. Ordinary profounders had to accumulate strength before they could execute an earth-rank technique, just like how Ling Xinran had accumulated strength before she executed the snowflake annihilation technique. However, Yuan Tong had just casually swung his hand and executed an earth-rank technique. Under the astounded gazes of all the spectators, the enormous energy palm and the dense snowflakes collided violently. In an instant, enormous bangs that could shake the world resounded like thunderclaps throughout the area. After that, a terrifying wave of energy that was like a tornado had appeared on the arena. When this tornado of energy appeared, the entire arena was instantly minced into pieces. It hadn't collapsed, and it had been minced into pieces instead. However, this wasn't the end of it. After it destroyed the entire arena, the tornado actually swept towards the profounders below the arena, causing them to be filled with horror. Fortunately, right at this moment, Li Si suddenly appeared in the sky above them. As he gazed at the tornado that carried terrifying and violent energy, Li Si stretched out his right hand and waved it lightly. After that, the enormous tornado had suddenly burst apart mysteriously. Chapter 258 A level of sword intent with every step. Li Si gazed at Yuan Tong who was on the ground below him, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After a short moment, everything returned to calm. Ling Xinran and Yuan Tong were both fine. An extremely thick shield of ice had been condensed around Ling Xinran, and it was exactly this shield of ice that allowed her to remain completely unscathed before the tornado of energy. As for Yuan Tong, his ability to remain completely unscathed slightly puzzled everyone because Yuan Tong hadn't utilized any treasure or executed any defensive technique. "Do you still intend to continue?" Yuan Tong was the first to speak. Ling Xinran glanced deeply at Yuan Tong, and then she said, "I've lost." As soon as she finished speaking, Ling Xinran walked down the arena. When she arrived by Yang Ye's side, she stopped and looked at him before she said, "He's very strong. Out of consideration for the fact that we've worked together in the past, allow me to advise you not to exert any pointless effort." Yang Yi smiled, and he twisted his wrist, causing 2 ice soul fruits flew towards Ling Xinran. After that, he said, "Thank you for your advice. However, I want to give it a try. I think that you would like to witness the limits of this future martial god as well, right?" After she put the ice soul fruits away, Ling Xinran took a deep glance at Yang Yi before she left. Before long, another new arena had appeared at the center of the square. Li Si appeared on the new arena, and then he glanced at Yang Yi and Yuan Tong before he said, "Both of you can choose to rest for a day or start the battle right now." Yuan Tong smiled indifferently and said, "There's no need for that." As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at Yang Yi. Yang Yi glanced at Yuan Tong before he said, "My thoughts are the same." Since they had to fight sooner or later, Yang Yi felt that it was better to finish it right now. Li Si glanced at Yang Yi, and then he said, "Since it's like that, then the battles will begin once more." The sword sects Yang Yi against the origin school's Yuan Tong. As soon as he finished speaking, Li Si's figure flashed and vanished from the arena. When Yuan Tong appeared on the arena, the surroundings instantly started seething with excitement. Yuan Tong! Martial God! One hit! The shouts of countless people converged together, and its impetus was extremely astounding. At this moment, everyone in the entire Southern Territory felt that Yang Yi would definitely lose. No, it should be said as they felt he would definitely die. Because up until now, no one had been able to make Yuan Tong reveal his full strength. Even Ling Xinran from the Snow Palace had no choice but to admit defeat before him. As for Yang Yi, what could he do even if had comprehended sword intent? Perhaps sword intent would be terrifying to others, but it was insufficient in front of Yuan Tong. Did Yang Yi have a chance to win? In their opinions, he naturally didn't. Even though Yang Yi still hadn't lost until now, Yang Yi had won with extreme difficulty against Li Xianjun, Qin Yuran, and Lin Xiuran. On the other hand, even if he was facing a formidable opponent like Ling Xinran, Yuan Tong could be said to have won every single battle with ease. So, wasn't it obvious who was superior between the two of them? On the wall of the Imperial Palace, Su Qin sure couldn't help but clench her fists tightly at the moment Yang Yi ascended the arena. She knew Yang Yi was very strong and definitely had some sort of trump card, but even she was slightly doubtful in his ability to defeat Yuan Tong. It wasn't that Yang Yi was weak, and it was because Yuan Tong was too strong. There was once a time when she wanted to ask Yang Yi to directly admit defeat because she knew that it was very likely for Yuan Tong to strike a killing blow against Yang Yi. Why? There were many reasons. One of them was that countless participants in the surroundings hoped for Yang Yi's death. If he killed Yang Yi, then Yuan Tong's popularity would instantly rise once more to a completely new level. However, was it even possible to make Yang Yi admit defeat? The answer was, it was impossible. On the other side, Kai Feng's face could really be said to be covered with smiles. If Yang Yi didn't admit defeat immediately in the battle with Yuan Tong, then Yang Yi would definitely have no chance to admit defeat. Moreover, based on the investigation and understanding she had obtained about Yang Yi, she knew that Yang Yi would absolutely not admit defeat. So, in other words, Yang Yi was dead. There was no resentment and enmity between her and Yang Yi. Yang Yi's only fault was being Feng Ye's son, and the relationship between her and Feng Yi was. How many moves from Yuan Tong do all of you think Yang Yi will be able to withstand? I guess he should be able to resist around 10 moves. After all, he killed Li Xianjun and Qin Yuran, said a profounder beneath the arena. 10 moves? You think too highly of him. I bet that he'd be defeated within 5 moves. No, he'll be killed within 5 moves. Sword intent? Sword intent is trash before Yuan Tong. I think that since Yang Yi dared to participate in the Ascension rankings and dares to fight Yuan Tong now, he probably has some sort of trump card. Otherwise, it's impossible for him to go give his life away, right? Perhaps he'll directly admit defeat later? On the arena, Yuan Tong had his hands behind his back as he gazed at Yang Yi, and then he said indifferently, Actually, I truly never imagined that you would be able to come all the way and fight the final battle with me. Needless to say, Li Xianjun, Qin Yuran, and Wen Yu's performance really disappointed me. I originally expected that it should be one of them who would be standing here before me. Yang Yi smiled and said, My thoughts just happened to be the opposite of yours. At the moment I decided to participate in the Ascension rankings, I'd already know that I would have such a battle with you. Truthfully speaking, I've wanted to fight to my heart's content since the beginning, and now, I can finally have what I wanted. Oh? Yuan Tong's brows raised and he said, You're really confident in yourself, huh? I know you definitely have some sort of trump card, otherwise you wouldn't dare to stand here before me. I only want to say that I hope your trump card and your strength isn't too weak. After all, I too hope to fight somewhat to my heart's content in the final battle of the Ascension rankings. Yang Yi said, Then shall we begin? Yuan Tong suddenly asked. Yang Yi was killed by you, right? Yang Yi didn't conceal it, nor was there any necessity to conceal it, and he immediately nodded. Then you must die. Yuan Tong spoke indifferently. Of course, you still have to die even if you didn't kill Yuan Yi. Because my origin school doesn't wish to see the sword sect rise once more. But what if I don't want to die? It was a rare occasion where Yang Yi wasted his breath in battle. Then make your move. Otherwise, it's very likely that you wouldn't have another opportunity. Yuan Tong spoke in an indifferent tone. Yang Yi nodded, and then he took a step forward. First-level sword intent surged out from within him. Yuan Tong smiled coldly and allowed the sword intent to assault him because first-level sword intent and second-level sword intent were utterly unable to affect him at all. Right at this moment, Yang Yi took another step forward. This time, his first-level sword intent had transformed into second-level sword intent. However, a cold smile and disdain still hung on Yuan Tong's face. Under the gazes of everyone in the surroundings, Yang Yi took another step forward. Bang! Right at the instant that Yang Yi's foot descended, the ground beneath his foot instantly cracked apart, and numerous cracks swept swiftly towards the surroundings like a spiderweb. Third-level sword intent. When they witnessed this scene, everyone in the surroundings was stunned, and this included those great figures that resided on the walls of the Imperial Palace. The initial stage of sword intent? Yang Yi has attained the initial stage of sword intent? Is this a joke? The initial stage of sword intent before the age of 20. Yuan Tong, who stood before Yang Yi, frowned slightly. Obviously, had never imagined that Yang Yi had actually attained the initial stage of sword intent. But so what? Why would he, Yuan Tong, fear third-level sword intent? So, his brows had quickly eased up. Moreover, he revealed an extremely excited expression because the battle that was about to begin might be much more interesting. However, right at this moment, Yang Yi took another step forward. Clang! At the instant Yang Yi's foot descended to the ground, the entire ground of the arena shattered into pieces as if it had suffered a heavy blow. At the same time, a sword howl suddenly erupted from the swords of every single profounder in the surroundings. Moreover, their swords had started to tremble as if they intended to charge into the sky. Fourth-level sword intent. When they witnessed this scene, the countless profounders below the arena were dumbstruck. If they were surprised earlier, then they were shocked now. Extremely shocked. Fourth-level sword intent. What sort of notion was that? Even the founding ancestor of the sword sect was around such a level at this age, right? On the walls of the Imperial Palace, Qin Yunzi's expression had turned solemn because fourth-level sword intent was really sufficient to pose a threat to Yuan Tong. Kai Feng's expression had become extremely unsightly. Fourth-level sword intent. Fourth-level sword intent before the age of 20. If he's able to survive and grow, then hell definitely be a huge calamity for my flower palace. Yang Yi must die no matter what. Even if I have to do it myself. At this moment, Kai Feng had decided in her heart. On the other hand, the sword sect Xu Heng had an extremely bitter expression. Fourth-level sword intent. At this moment, the regret in his heart seemed like tidewater as it surged out from the depths of his heart. A monstrous genius that attained the fourth level of sword intent before the age of 20 was actually abandoned by the sword sect just like that. The sword sect's decision was really wrong. Su Qinshu heaved a slight sigh of relief instead because Yang Yi, who possessed fourth-level sword intent, possessed the ability to fight Yuan Tong. It was even to the extent that he could pose a threat to Yuan Tong. At this moment, she had finally seen a glimmer of hope. A genius of the sword Dao! Li Si spoke while he gazed at Yang Yi. On the arena, Yuan Tong frowned once more, and then he said in a deep voice. Yang Yi, needless to say, all of us underestimated you. However, do you think only you possess intent at the fourth level? As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Tong took a step forward, and then a strand of terrifying battle intent that wasn't the slightest bit inferior to Yang Yi's sword intent had swept out like a tornado. Bang! The two intents collided with each other, and the newly built arena instantly collapsed completely. Moreover, the collapsed arena actually started to be minced into pieces under the might of their intents. Fourth-level battle intent. Everyone in the surroundings gasped when they witnessed this scene. Yuan Tong has really comprehended battle intent. Moreover, it's even at the 4th level. Chapter 259 Swords. Come to me. As expected of the existence that's most likely to become the martial god. He has attained 4th level battle intent before the age of 20. If he has even comprehended fist intent, then Yuan Tong can probably truly be considered as the most monstrous genius in the Southern Territory for the last 1,000 years. As he gazed at Yuan Tong, who stood on the arena, Li Si spoke in a low voice. Bai Qi, who stood by Li Si's side, spoke abruptly. If he really has comprehended fist intent as well, then Yang Yi will be in danger. Li Si glanced at Yang Yi, and then he said, Yan Yi's luck is truly horrible. If Yuan Tong wasn't here, then he would become the most dazzling existence in the younger generation. Unfortunately, it's very likely that he'll serve as a contrast to Yuan Tong's magnificent reputation as the martial god. The two extremely formidable and fierce intents were raging through the square, causing even the harm limestone that paved the ground to be unable to endure them and start to crack slowly. On the other hand, those profounders that were originally below the arena had retreated over 60 m behind. As they gazed at the two figures on the battlefield that had caused such destructive force with only their intent, the countless profounders in the surroundings were extremely shocked. At this moment, they finally understood that the intent of legend was actually so terrifying. Yuan Tong gazed at Yan Yi while a cold smile hung on the corners of his mouth. He said, Yan Yi, what other trump cards do you have? Feel free to utilize them, otherwise, it's very likely that you won't have another chance. Yan Yi took a deep breath. As expected, he really deserves to be the most monstrous genius in the Southern Territory for the last 1,000 years. It really is impossible to suppress him by relying solely on my 4th level sword intent. When he thought up to here, Yan Yi flipped his palm, and a sword chest appeared in his hand. When facing an existence like Yuan Tong, ordinary techniques and attacks were utterly useless. So, Yan Yi had directly exposed two trump cards that he hadn't exposed until now. With a command in his heart, the 36 profound rank swords within the sword chest transformed into 36 rays of light that shot into the sky. Under Yan Yi's control, the 36 swords swiftly formed a circle in midair, and they circled around above Yuan Tong. The speed of these 36 swords was extremely swift, and it was to the point the spectators were unable to see the swords clearly, and could only see 36 strands of white light circling swiftly in midair. Yuan Tong's eyes narrowed slightly as he gazed at the 36 swords, and a wisp of a solemn expression had flashed once more in the depths of his eyes. The sword formation formed from the 36 swords wasn't very terrifying, and the truly terrifying aspect was that these 36 swords were being enhanced by 4th level sword intent. Under the enhancement of 4th level sword intent, the might of this sword formation seemed terrifying. At the very least, he had to take it seriously. With a slight movement of his hands, a pair of dark golden gloves appeared in Yuan Tong's hands. The surface of the dark golden gloves was densely covered in black spikes that were a few centimeters long. Under the illumination of the sun, the glove flickered with a ghastly glow that terrified the soul. It's the martial god gloves! As he gazed at the dark gold gloves that Yuan Tong had withdrawn, Yu Hing's expression changed as he said, According to rumor, the martial god gloves were refined from the bones of 999 exalt rank dark beasts. Not only is it extremely sharp and difficult to be harmed by dark treasures, but rumors also say that the incomplete soul of an exalt realm dark beast resides within it. That's a heaven-rank dark treasure? Su Qinshe suddenly interrupted Yu Heng and asked this question. Yu Heng shook his head and said, Even though it isn't a heaven-rank dark treasure, it isn't too far away from one. When he spoke up to hear, Yu Heng suddenly laughed bitterly and said, In Yuan Tong's hands, these gloves are simply like adding wings to a tiger. Alas! Even though he didn't like Yan Yi, at this moment, he hoped that Yan Yi could win because the outcome of the battle was related to the benefits the sword sect would obtain. After he wore the gloves, Yuan Tong said slowly, Since I, Yuan Tong, started cultivating until now, there has never been a profounder at the same realm of cultivation that could make me withdraw this pair of gloves. Yang Yi, needless to say, you should feel proud of yourself. Yang Yi didn't say anything. With a command in his heart, the sword formation that had accumulated strength in midair for a long time suddenly stabbed directly downward at Yuan Tong. Moreover, their speed was so swift that it was astounding. At the same time, Yan Yi's left hand moved slightly, and the hidden sword shot swiftly and silently towards Yuan Tong. Yang Yi really didn't hold back at all when facing this extraordinary genius. As he gazed at the sword formation that stabbed straight down toward him, a wisp of a ferocious expression flashed in Yuan Tong's eyes. He suddenly stomped with his right foot, and his figure shot out explosively. The profound energy within his body flowed slightly, causing the dark golden gloves to instantly seem as if they'd come to life, and the spikes on them actually started moving gradually. "Fuck off!" Yuan Tong shouted fiercely while he smashed his fists towards the 36 swords. Space instantly shook before the energy from his fists blasted out. Everywhere it passed, ripples arose in space, and the sound of air exploding resounded incessantly wherever the ripples passed. Third-level fist intent. When they witnessed this scene, the expressions on Yu Heng and Su Qingshi's faces had changed violently. Yuan Tong actually is an existence that has the legendary ability to possess dual intent. Yuan Tong really does possess extraordinary natural talent, Li Si said in a low voice. Not only has he comprehended battle intent, but he has also comprehended fist intent. The most terrifying aspect of it all is that he has actually raised these intents to the 4th and 3rd level respectively. If he's given the time to grow, then he'll probably reign invincible throughout the world just like the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect had all those years ago. When he spoke up to hear, Li Si gazed at Yang Yi, and then he shook his head and said, "What a pity! Yang Yi should have been the most dazzling existence. Unfortunately, he's bound to serve as contrast for Yuan Tong now." How unfortunate! In midair, the force from Yuan Tong's fists had just collided with Yan Yi's sword formation when the formation was instantly blasted apart, causing numerous swords to be blasted towards the surroundings. However, right at this moment, Yuan Tong's pupils had suddenly constricted, and he practically acted out of instinct as he suddenly smashed his right fist towards his left. Bang! The sound of metal colliding resounded. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. Yang Yi shook his heart with slight regret when he saw that the hidden sword had failed to take Yuan Tong by surprise. Yuan Tong really isn't someone that trash like Qin Yuan can compare to. He was actually able to notice the hidden sword while under such circumstances. Such awareness of danger is truly too formidable. After he blasted the hidden sword back with a single punch, Yuan Tong's expression became slightly more solemn. He gazed at Yang Yi as he said in a low voice, "Qin Yuan perished at the hands of this strange sword and sword control technique of yours, right?" Yang Yi nodded and he said, "Unfortunately, it seems to be useless against you." Yuan Tong laughed coldly and said, "Yang Yi, if your trump card is merely this sword formation and that technique of sword control, then you'll have to die here today." Yang Yi nodded, and then he took a step forward before he gestured towards both sides with his hands. At the same time, he shouted, "Swords! Come to me!" As soon as he finished speaking, an extremely shocking scene suddenly appeared. So long as they had a sword with them, the swords of all the profounders below the arena had suddenly erupted with a sword howl, and then they transformed into a ray of light that shot violently towards Yang Yi. Sword after sword flew towards Yang Yi, and in less than a breath of time, a few thousand swords had appeared in the sky above Yang Yi. It was an extremely magnificent scene. On the walls of the Imperial Palace, the green darkness sword in Su Qingshi's possession had trembled slightly as well, and then it suddenly struggled free of Su Qingshi's control and transformed into a green streak that shot towards Yang Yi. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. At this moment, Qin Yanzi's expression was slightly unsightly and solemn. Because even his own sword had started to tremble slightly just now, and if he hadn't suppressed it, even his sword would have probably obeyed Yang Yi's summon. If Qin Yanzi's expression was merely unsightly, then Kai Feng's expression was extremely unsightly. Because she noticed that up until this very moment, She'd been constantly underestimating Yan Yi by too much. What a mysterious and profound technique of sword control! Li Si sighed with praise. This technique of sword control is truly peerlessly profound. Especially when it's utilized at the hands of Yan Yi, who has comprehended sword intent. Its might and traits have even been fully brought to life. However, the sword sect doesn't seem to possess this technique of sword control. Looks like this Yan Yi is a person that possesses karmic luck as well. All of us have underestimated him. Bai Qi suddenly spoke from the side. Li Si nodded lightly to display his agreement. On the battlefield, Yuan Tong's expression had turned slightly more solemn again, while he gazed at the dense expanse of swords that covered the sky. The quality of all these swords wasn't very high, but when they were enhanced by the sword intent that Yan Yi possessed and controlled by Yan Yi's shocking technique of sword control, these swords had instantly become terrifying. Even he had no choice but to fear swords that were enhanced by 4th-level sword intent. Yuan Tong took a deep breath before he took a step forward, and the ground that he stepped on instantly cracked apart. He raised his hands slightly, and a violent gale instantly appeared out of thin air. After that, he flipped his right palm downward while the profound energy in his body started to surge violently, and the terrifying energy flowing within his right palm actually caused the space around his palm to faintly show signs of warping. It seemed like the space there would explode into pieces at any moment. At a certain moment in time, Yan Yi issued a command in his heart, and the 36 profound rank swords that floated in midair transformed into 36 rays of golden light that seemed to have torn through space as they shot down in single file. It was like a shooting star was descending from the heavens, and it emanated a golden glow of the sword as it shot explosively towards Yuan Tong. At the same time, the thousands of swords that floated in the air transformed into countless streaks that shot down towards Yuan Tong with shocking impetus. As he gazed at the dense expanse of swords that were shooting towards him, Yuan Tong took another step forward. In the next moment, he suddenly flipped his palm upward, and then swiftly smashed it forward. Heaven split palm! Along with a grim shout from Yuan Tong, an enormous palm print formed from energy appeared in front of Yuan Tong. The enormous energy palm carried extremely terrifying might as it blasted forward towards the dense expanse of swords. Under the gazes of everyone in the surroundings, the enormous energy palm collided violently with the dense expanse of swords that were under Yan Yi's control. After a moment of silence, an enormous bang resounded like a thunderclap, and then layer after layer of waves of energy swept out incessantly from the point of collision. Everywhere these waves of energy passed, the harm limestone that paved the ground was instantly blasted up into the air. The entire surroundings were in a mess. On the other hand, those profounders around the arena were ceaselessly retreating backward at this moment because the wave of energy hadn't stopped, and it was even sweeping swiftly towards them. Chapter 260 Break. 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 Right when the wave of energy was about to hit the spectators, Li Si appeared here once more, and he waved his right hand lightly as he gazed at the terrifying wave of energy that was sweeping over, causing the waves of energy to instantly and mysteriously vanish on the spot. After that, he shot a glance at Yan Yi and Yuan Tong before his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After the wave of energy vanished, all the spectators recovered from their shock, and then they hurriedly gazed at Yan Yi and Yuan Tong. At this moment, both Yan Yi and Yuan Tong were in a slightly embarrassing state. The terrifying wave of energy had caused their clothes to be in rags. Especially Yuan Tong, because countless dense marks of the sword had appeared on the clothes he wore. Even though it was like that, Yuan Tong hadn't suffered any material harm. Yan Yi hadn't suffered any material harm as well. Of course, it was because his physical defenses were formidable. As he gazed at the dense marks of the sword that covered his clothes, Yuan Tong's expression became unsightly. He raised his head to gaze at Yan Yi before he said, "Since I advanced into the first heaven realm, it's the first time a profounder at the same realm of cultivation has put me in such an embarrassing state. Needless to say, you've succeeded in infuriating me. You'll pay for this with your life." Yan Yi's brows raised as he said, "Why don't you give it a try?" Yuan Tong's eyes narrowed slightly when he heard this, and then killing intent flashed within them. After that, he took a step forward, and the ground that he stepped on instantly split apart while he raised his hands. Suddenly, a violent gale appeared out of thin air. At the same time, his body suddenly seemed like a vortex, and it made the energy in the surrounding world to start surging towards him without end. He's drawing upon the energy of the heavens and the earth. It's a heaven rank technique. My God! Yuan Tong actually intends to execute a heaven rank technique. Someone amongst the spectators in the surroundings had cried out involuntarily upon witnessing this scene. On the wall of the imperial palace, the frown on Qin Yunzi's face had eased up, and it wasn't covered in worry anymore. He smiled as he said in a low voice, "This Yang Yi really is pretty strong to be able to force Yuan Tong to execute a heaven rank technique of my origin school." On the other hand, Kai Feng smiled without trying to cover it up at all. A heaven rank technique. That isn't something an earth rank technique can compare to. Yang Yi is definitely dead this time. Yu Heng and Su Qingshi frowned simultaneously instead. They were naturally aware of the might possessed by a heaven rank technique, and it was countless times stronger than an earth rank technique. So, how could Yang Yi resist a heaven rank technique? The energy around Yuan Tong grew denser and denser. In the end, it actually seemed material. Yuan Tong roared with laughter, and then he gazed at Yang Yi who stood in front of him and said, "Yang Yi, receive a move of mine as well." As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Tong took another step forward, and then he raised his right hand and pointed a finger towards Yang Yi. "Calamity Point!" As soon as he spoke, the clouds in the sky above the square had suddenly started roiling, and then a few bolts of lightning suddenly appeared amidst the clouds. Subsequently, an extremely enormous finger gradually appeared from within the clouds, and the others in the surroundings couldn't help but tremble at the instant that this enormous finger appeared. As he gazed at the enormous finger, Yan Yi's expression had turned extraordinarily solemn. He was able to sense the terrifying energy contained within the enormous finger. Even if his physical body had been cultivated to an inconceivable state, he would probably be transformed into mush if he was struck by this enormous finger. As she gazed at the enormous finger appearing from the clouds, Su Qingshi's beautiful brows had knit together, and her fair finger trembled slightly while the profound energy within her body had started to circulate swiftly. Qin Yunzi seemed to have sensed the unusual movement of profound energy within Su Qingshi, and he glanced at her before the profound energy within his body started circulating as well. Even though Yang Yi wasn't a match for Yuan Tong, if he were to fall into the sword sect's hands, then the sword sect would definitely be able to rise to prominence in the future. So, he felt that it was best for Yang Yi to die. "Should we rescue him?" Baichi gazed at Yang Yi as he spoke in a low voice. A wisp of hesitation flashed in Li Si's eyes, but he shook his head in the end, and he said, "Fourth level sword intent while below the age of 20. He can really be considered as a genius in the sword Dao. However, it's insufficient to make us break the rules for him. As I said before, our Grand Qin Empire will definitely save him if he's able to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings." Baichi shook his head lightly and said, "This heaven rank technique isn't something he can resist. Unless he possesses a heaven rank technique as well. However, he still hasn't executed one until now. Obviously, he doesn't." Li Si didn't say anything else. On the battlefield, the extremely enormous finger carried terrifying might and emanated immense pressure as it descended straight down towards Yang Yi. Because the energy contained within it was truly too terrifying, the ground around Yang Yi had actually started to collapse inch by inch when it was over 100 m away from the ground. On the other hand, as the target of the enormous finger, Yang Yi had actually slowly closed his eyes at this moment. The countless spectators in the surroundings were stunned when they witnessed this scene. Does Yang Yi intend to surrender? Even if he wants to surrender, he should shout that he admits defeat and not act in this way. Could it be that he wants to throw his life away? Under the puzzled and bewildered gazes of countless others in the surroundings, the enormous finger arrived less than 3 m above Yang Yi. Right at this moment, Yang Yi's eyes suddenly opened, and 2 sword lights flashed in the depths of them. At the same time, Yan Yi drew his sword and stabbed it directly at the enormous finger, causing a golden strand of sword chi to shoot out explosively. Break! Along with this loud shout from Yan Yi, the golden strand of sword chi had instantly shot at the center of the enormous finger, and then it shook slightly under the astounded gazes of everyone. After that, a bang resounded as the enormous finger exploded apart. Everyone was dumbstruck. A heaven rank technique was destroyed just like that? That's a heaven rank technique. A heaven rank technique. But it vanished with a casual wave of Yang Yi's hand? At this moment, the minds of countless people had gone blank. On the walls of the imperial palace, all the great figures there had frowned. Obviously, even they couldn't figure out how Yang Yi had destroyed the heaven rank technique with a single strike of his sword. At this moment, Li Si and Bai Qi had frowned as well. Because destroying a heaven rank technique with a single strike of the sword was really too unusual. How did Yang Yi accomplish this? Countless people were thinking about this very question right now. At this moment, Yuan Tong had frowned as well, and his eyes were filled with a puzzled and bewildered expression. He was naturally clearly aware of the might possessed by a heaven rank technique. It was exactly because he was clearly aware of it that he was even more puzzled and bewildered. Because even a Peking realm expert was very likely to be instantly annihilated by a heaven rank technique. However, such a technique had been destroyed by a single strike of Yang Yi's sword. Yuan Tong let out a light breath of air, flipped his palm, and then swiftly pushed it toward Yang Yi. Heaven split palm! As soon as he finished speaking, an enormous energy palm whistled through the air and left behind a string of explosions as it shot violently towards Yang Yi. There was no emotion on Yang Yi's face as he gazed at the earth rank technique, heaven split palm, that was shooting towards him, and he suddenly drew his sword and slashed when it was merely 3 m away from him. Break! The strange scene from before had appeared once more. Under the astounded and puzzled gazes of everyone in the surroundings, the enormous and terrifying energy palm had suddenly exploded with a bang, and then it dispersed and vanished in midair. What exactly is going on? Is Yang Yi cheating? Why can a simple strike of his sword destroy earth rank and heaven rank techniques? There's definitely something fishy about this. Exactly. Doesn't Yang Yi possess a mysterious king rank dark beast? Could it be that it's lending him a hand? It's definitely like that. Otherwise, how could Yang Yi be so formidable to destroy a heaven rank technique with a single strike of his sword? Does he think he's the Sword Emperor? Countless people started discussing animatedly in the surroundings. On the other hand, the brows of the great figures on the walls of the imperial palace had knit together even more tightly, and then puzzled expressions in their eyes had grown denser. Because this scene was truly too mysterious. Their instinct told them that the mysterious king-rank dark beast in Yang Yi's position hadn't lent Yang Yi a hand, because if it had, then they would have definitely been able to sense it with the strengths they possessed. It was exactly because of this that they felt even more puzzled and bewildered. Li Si was staring fixedly at Yang Yi as if he wanted to see through Yang Yi. Earlier, had been constantly recollecting the scene from before when Yang Yi had swung his sword, because Li Si wanted to determine if Yang Yi had relied on any external sources of strength. However, the facts told him that Yang Yi hadn't relied on any external sources of strength. It was exactly because of this that Li Si's mind was filled with bewilderment. How exactly did Yang Yi destroy an earth rank and heaven rank technique with a single strike of his sword? It wasn't just Li Si, many others were trying to guess the answer as well, and they thought of countless possibilities. However, none of them had thought of the enlightened sword heart. Because in the 10,000 years of history of the Southern Territory, the number of people who had attained the enlightened sword heart could be counted with a single hand. Every one of these people was the Sword Emperor of their time. They were extraordinary experts that reigned supreme over a generation. So, how could Yang Yi be compared to such figures? So, no one in the surroundings had thought that Yang Yi possessed the enlightened sword heart. At this moment, Yuan Tong's expression was slightly unsightly. Yang Yi had destroyed a heaven rank and earth rank technique he executed with a single strike of the sword, and this was undoubtedly like a slap to his face. Even though he really wondered how exactly Yang Yi had accomplished this, he felt even more rage at this moment. Yuan Tong took another step forward while the small amount of profound energy that was left within his body had started to surge violently. He gazed at Yang Yi and said with a slightly savage tone, "Yang Yi, I don't believe you're so mysterious. Receive a few more moves of mine and let me see if you really can destroy all of them with a single strike of your sword." As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Tong lightly tapped his right foot on the ground and instantly soared up into the sky. In midair, Yuan Tong moved about swiftly, and then numerous terrifying combat techniques covered the heavens and the earth as they enveloped down towards Yang Yi. Heaven split palm. Break. Earth shatter. Break. The enlightened king's seal. Break. On the battlefield, every single combat technique that Yuan Tong executed was destroyed by a single strike of Yang Yi's sword. As they watched such a scene, all the spectators in the surroundings seemed to have been petrified on the spot, and their eyes were filled with shock and bewilderment. Qin Yanzi's brows were knit together tightly. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes opened wide. At the same time, he suddenly clenched his fists tightly while his eyes were filled with astonishment, and he said with a slightly trembling voice, "Enlightened! Enlightened sword! Enlightened sword heart!" At this moment, it wasn't just Qin Yunzi who thought of this. The members of all the other 5 great powers and both Li Si and Bai Qi from the Grand Qin Empire had thought of it as well. Chapter 261: A Close Quarter Battle. At the moment they realized that Yang Yi had attained the enlightened sword heart, the expressions from the representatives of all the 6 great powers in the Grand Qin Empire were extremely colorful. Qin Yunzi and Kai Feng's expressions were especially unsightly, as if someone had dug up the grave of their ancestors. The enlightened sword heart. I never expected that Yang Yi has actually attained the enlightened sword sect. Both of them were truly unable to accept this in a short period of time. On the other hand, Yu Heng's expression was slightly strange. It started with shock and excitement before transforming into bitterness and regret. If Yang Yi had merely comprehended sword intent, then even though it was a slight pity that the sword sect had given up on him, it wasn't to the point of making the sword sect feel regretful. However, the enlightened sword heart was different. Not to mention the sword sect, even the origin school would probably feel extremely regretful if it had done something similar. What was the enlightened sword heart? Possessing it was like becoming an emperor of the sword and attaining the ability to destroy all techniques with a single strike of the sword. If Yang Yi was given sufficient time, then an extraordinary expert in the sword would definitely appear in the Southern Territory. At that time, the sword sect would rise in status along with him, and it wasn't impossible for the sword sect to recover to the state it was at during its prime. However, it was all too late now. Because Yang Yi wasn't a disciple of the sword sect anymore, and no matter how dazzling Yang Yi was in the future, it would be completely unrelated to the sword sect. When he thought up to here, the bitter expression on Yu Heng's face grew deeper. After this day passed, the higher-ups of the sword sect would become the laughingstock of all the experts in the world. Because they'd kicked out a genius who'd comprehended 4th-level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. So, how stupid would the higher-ups of the sword sect have to be in order to make such an idiotic decision? At this moment, Su Qinshe heaved a light sigh of relief because Yang Yi, who possessed the enlightened sword heart, was finally on equal footing with Yuan Tong. Even if he wasn't able to defeat Yuan Tong, there would be no problem for him to withdraw safely from the battle. Because all techniques were useless before Yang Yi. In the crowd, Wen Yu gazed at Yang Yi while she spoke in a low voice. The enlightened sword heart. Auntie Yu would definitely be extremely happy if she knew. Li Si gazed at Yang Yi and said, I originally thought he was a mere genius in the sword Dao, but it looks like I've underestimated him. He isn't just a genius in the sword Dao but an extraordinary genius in the sword Dao. He has already comprehended 4th-level sword intent before the age of 20, and he has even attained the enlightened sword heart. Such natural talent isn't inferior to the sword sect's founding ancestor from 10,000 years ago. Meanwhile, Bai Qi suddenly said, Now, he has the qualifications to make our Grand Qin Empire be willing to sacrifice some things for him, right? Yes. But the precondition is that he survives the battle, Lisi said in a light voice. Now, this battle is truly growing more and more interesting. The quasi-sword emperor and the quasi-martial god are actually having their destined battle in advance. I truly feel more and more anticipation towards the outcome of their battle. On the square before the imperial palace, the entire crowd had erupted into an uproar and seethed with excitement when they found out that Yan Yi possessed the enlightened sword heart. No wonder both Li Xianjun and Lin Ziyuan's terrifying techniques were mysteriously destroyed by him. So it turns out that Yan Yi has attained the enlightened sword art. The enlightened sword heart, the ability to destroy all techniques with a single strike. I never expected that Yan Yi is actually a quasi-sword emperor. No wonder that he was always so composed and arrogant. So he possessed the enlightened sword heart. The enlightened sword heart. Yuan Tong is in danger now. However, I still think that Yuan Tong will win. So what if he possesses the enlightened sword heart? Supposedly, Yuan Tong has comprehended the heart of the strong. What's the heart of the strong? That's an existence that grows stronger in accordance with the enemy. Moreover, Yuan Tong has obtained the guidance of the extraordinary experts of the Origin School. Regardless of whether it was combat experience or any other aspect, Yan Yi can't compare to Yuan Tong at all. But don't forget that Yan Yi has comprehended 4th level sword intent and possesses the enlightened sword heart that's capable of destroying all techniques with a single strike. You witnessed it earlier, it isn't an exaggeration at all. Moreover, Yan Yi's physical body is comparable to a king-rank dark beast. If Yuan Tong can't utilize any formidable combat techniques, then how would we break through Yan Yi's physical defenses? In my opinion, this battle is full of suspense. Yan Yi is truly scheming. He actually concealed his trump cards for so long before finally revealing them now. In my opinion, if he didn't have to go against Yuan Tong, then he would probably continue concealing those trump cards of his. This is really too scheming of him, and I look down upon him for that. You look down upon him? You idiot! That's called concealing his strength, understand? That's enough. No matter what, this battle will definitely be this year's Ascension rankings. No, it'll definitely be the most exciting battle since the Ascension rankings began. The quasi-sword emperor against the quasi-martial god. Just thinking about it makes me feel excited. Let's wait and see if Yuan Tong defeats Yan Yi to secure his title as the martial god, or will Yan Yi defeat Yuan Tong to attain the position of sword emperor? At the moment that Yan Yi revealed the ability of his enlightened sword heart, countless transmission talismans had instantly erupted from the square outside the Imperial Palace. At the headquarters of the Talisman Masters Association, the president, Bai Shan, who was crafting a talisman, had suddenly received a transmission talisman. After he heard the content of it, a crack resounded as the talisman brush in Bai Shan's hand was snapped into two. The 4th level of sword intent before the age of 20. The enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. In the hall, Bai Shan's murmurs that were filled with disbelief drifted through the hall, whereas he himself had vanished from the hall and had flashed towards the Imperial Palace. At one of the 4 great clans of the Imperial capital, the Yang clan. The Yang clan's patriarch was an exalt realm expert called Jian Ning. He had white hair and a face that was covered and wrinkled. When he finished listening to the contents of the transmission talisman, Yan Ning had suddenly started roaring with laughter. Ha ha! The 4th level of sword intent before the age of 20. The enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. The quasi-sword emperor. Ha ha! The heavens truly don't wish for my Yang clan to be destroyed. At this instant, all the superior clans and powers in the entire imperial capital had found out about Yan Yi's attainment of the enlightened sword heart. The quasi-sword emperor and quasi-martial god were fighting for the first position on the Ascension rankings. At this moment, there was no news more exciting and delightful than this. So, at this moment, countless profounders in the capital were rushing madly towards the square outside the imperial palace. At this moment, Yuan Tong had finally taken Yan Yi serious for the first time. If the sword intent could only cause slight trouble for him, then the enlightened sword heart was capable of posing a threat to him. Because Yan Yi could destroy all techniques with a single strike. Unless Head grasped a combat technique to perfection, otherwise, all techniques were useless before Yang Yi. On the other hand, even he who possessed extraordinary natural talent was unable to grasp an earth rank or heaven rank technique to perfection. Because even king realm experts and spirit realm experts were rarely able to accomplish that. Since he was unable to attain perfection in his cultivation of a technique, it meant that there was only one way to defeat Yang Yi, and it was hand-to-hand combat battle. Yuan Tong was undoubtedly very formidable in hand-to-hand combat. If he was facing any other opponent, the hand-to-hand combat was definitely an enormous advantage of his. However, when he faced Yang Yi, who possessed a physical body comparable to a king-ranked dark beast, this advantage of his wasn't very great anymore. In short, Yang Yi had forced him to start taking Yang Yi seriously and taking the battle seriously. Because he had a feeling that if he wasn't serious, then his title as the martial god would probably be gone. I never expected that you would possess the enlightened sword heart. What a surprise! As he gazed at Yang Yi, Yuan Tong spoke slowly. I originally thought that attaining the title of martial god would be extremely easy for me because not a single profounder in the younger generation of the Southern Territory could make me take them seriously. But I never imagined that you would appear. Never mind. Once I defeat you, my title as martial god would become even more secure, and that existence on Martial God Mountain would have no further excuses. Come, let me see if you, the Quasi-Sword Emperor, are stronger or I, the Quasi-Martial God, am stronger. Yan Yi's wrists moved slightly, and then violet spirit and green darkness that had fallen to the ground in the surroundings instantly transformed into two rays of light that flew towards him. He held green darkness in his left hand and violet spirit in his right hand, and then he slowly raised them and pointed them at Yuan Tong before he said, I'm not interested in the title of Sword Emperor. But it's fine, my objective is the first position on the Ascension rankings. So, in other words, we must decide on a victor. Since it's like that, then let's fight to our heart's content. Haha. That's exactly what I want. As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Tong suddenly stomped the ground with his right foot, and then his figure shot out like a cannonball towards Yang Yi. When he saw Yuan Tong shoot explosively towards him, Yang Yi's figure moved as well, and he flashed towards Yuan Tong. Bang! As soon as they came into contact with each other, an explosion rumbled and resounded from the battlefield, and then both of them shot backward explosively. In the next moment, they shot towards each other again. At this moment, Yang Yi utilized the basic sword technique that he hadn't utilized for a very long time. Perhaps the basic sword technique was useless against others, but it couldn't be any better when utilized for close-quarter combat. With the enhancement of his sword intent and his perfect grasp of the basic sword technique, the might revealed by the sword sect's basic sword technique had instantly risen by countless times in Yang Yi's hands. Even Yuan Tong had to fear the might of every single strike of his sword and not dare go head-on against it. This caused the countless spectators to be extremely shocked because they never imagined that the basic sword technique could possess such might. Of course, Yuan Tong's combat instinct caused Yang Yi to be extremely fearful of it as well. Because every single seemingly perfect strike of his sword would be easily avoided or blocked by Yuan Tong. Moreover, after Yuan Tong blocked his attacks, Yuan Tong's own attacks would be extremely shocking and difficult to deal with. Especially when these attacks were enhanced by Yuan Tong's battle intent and fist intent. Even the slightest carelessness would cause him to suffer a barrage of attacks from Yuan Tong. This made Yang Yi feel as if he was treading on thin ice, and he didn't dare be careless at all. At this moment, Yuan Tong was extremely fearful of Yang Yi as well, and he didn't dare be careless in the slightest. Because Yang Yi's method of fighting was truly too shameless. Yang Yi had basically given up on defending himself and completely seemed like he wanted to exchange his own life for Yuan Tong's life. The reason Yang Yi was able to do this so fearless was that his physical body was comparable to a king-ranked dark beast, so suffering a few punches were utterly trivial to Yang Yi. However, if Yuan Tong were to suffer a few blows of Yang Yi's sword, then it would definitely be lethal. So, at this moment, Yuan Tong had really become serious. The spectators were astonished by the battle between Yang Yi and Yuan Tong. Because regardless of whether it was Yuan Tong or Yang Yi, both of their combat instincts were too terrifying. This caused the spectators to have the misconception that it wasn't two First Heaven Realm experts who were fighting before them, and it was King Realm experts or even Spirit Realm experts instead. Chapter 260 To the King Realm. Sword Spirit. The battle between Yang Yi and Yuan Tong had arrived at its climax. At this moment, Yang Yi, who held Violet Spirit in his right hand, had executed the Sword Sect's basic sword technique to the acme of perfection. In the opinions of the others, it wasn't a yellow rank technique anymore, and it was an earth rank sword technique. Moreover, at this moment, Yang Yi fully displayed the might of the sword control technique. Yes, at the same time he was utilizing the basic sword technique against Yuan Tong. The green darkness sword had transformed into a green ray of light that ceaselessly attacked Yuan Tong. It could be said that Yuan Tong wasn't just fighting Yang Yi alone, and he was fighting two people. Because the green darkness sword which Yang Yi controlled revealed a might that wasn't inferior to another First Heaven Realm expert. Even though the spectators didn't really like Yang Yi, they had no choice but to feel admiration towards Yang Yi's sword techniques. Especially the sword control technique, because in their opinions, the green darkness sword simply seemed as if it had come to life. Even though Yang Yi had gained the upper hand in the battle, his expression grew more and more solemn. Because he noticed that Yuan Tong was still able to resist him with ease even when he was attacking in unison with the sword control technique. Yuan Tong's combat instinct was something that even he, Yang Yi, had to admire. At this moment, Yuan Tong's expression was extremely solemn as well. Even though he had relied on his extraordinary combat instinct to repeatedly avoid Yang Yi's lethal strikes, he knew that he would definitely fall into an extremely disadvantageous position if this were to continue. Because Yang Yi, who possessed the physical defense of a king-rank dark beast, could be said to be in an invincible position. Yuan Tong's eyes narrowed slightly when he thought up to here. He suddenly slapped his right palm against the violet spirit sword that Yang Yi had slashed down towards him, and then he relied on the counterforce to retreat around 15 m back and withdraw from the battle. When he saw Yuan Tong stop, Yang Yi stopped as well. Because he noticed the same problem that Yuan Tong had noticed, and that problem was that it was utterly impossible to finish Yuan Tong off by relying solely on close-quartered combat with the basic sword technique. The reason for this was that Yuan Tong's combat instinct was truly too terrifying. As he gazed at Yang Yi, Yuan Tong let out a light breath of air before he said, "I never expected that you would be able to pressure me to such an extent. Yang Yi, you can feel proud of yourself. But now, you don't have a chance to win anymore." As soon as he finished speaking, a strand of a terrifying, imposing aura suddenly swept out like a tornado from within Yuan Tong's body. The King Realm? The expression on Su Qingshi's beautiful face changed when she saw this scene, and she cried out involuntarily. Yu Heng, who stood by her side, was shocked as well, but he quickly shook his head and said, "It isn't the King Realm, and it's only the half-step King Realm. I never imagined that Yuan Tong has actually transformed a portion of the profound energy within his body into true essence, and has attained the half-step King Realm. The half-step King Realm before the age of 20. Such natural talent can't be described with just the word terrifying. Only experts below the King Realm are able to participate in the Ascension rankings. He's already attained the half-step King Realm, so does it violate the rules?" said Su Qingshu in a low voice. Yu Heng shook his head and said, "It doesn't violate the rules. The half-step King Realm is still below the King Realm." Su Qingshi's face sank when she heard this. Even though the gaps between experts at the King Realm and First Heaven Realm couldn't be described as being like the gap between the heavens and the earth, there was no doubt that King Realm experts had numerous advantages when compared to First Heaven Realm experts. The greatest difference was that once one attained the King Realm, the profound energy within the body would undergo a qualitative transformation and become true essence. This true essence was naturally very much stronger than the profound energy possessed by First Heaven Realm profounders. If it was any other ordinary King Realm expert, then Yang Yi naturally had no reason to be too fearful of that expert. However, was Yuan Tong an ordinary King Realm expert? Even though he was merely at the half-step king realm and only a portion of the profound energy within his body had been transformed into true essence, one couldn't forget that he was an extraordinarily monstrous genius. Surmounting realms to do battle was extremely normal for him, yet now he had the advantage of a higher realm of cultivation. So, was it possible for him to allow another to surmount the gap in their realms of cultivation to defeat him? The answer was that it was practically impossible. This was what Su Qingshe thought at this moment, and it was also the reason why her expression was gloomy. On the other side, Qin Yunzi was slightly stunned when he saw Yuan Tong erupt with the imposing aura of a half-step king realm. Obviously, even he didn't know that Yuan Tong had attained the half-step king realm. But in next to no time, the gloomy expression on his face had started to transform into a bright smile. Yuan Tong could be said to be on par with Yan Yi while he hadn't displayed his cultivation at the half-step king realm. Now that Yuan Tong had utilized his cultivation at the half-step king realm, it meant that Yuan Tong had a comparatively larger advantage. It truly is full of twists and turns. Li Si gazed at Yuan Tong and said, I never expected that Yuan Tong actually concealed his cultivation. The half-step king realm before the age of 20. How many years has it been since someone like this has appeared in the Southern Territory? Since the founding ancestor of the Origin School, there hasn't been another figure like him. Meanwhile, Bai Qi suddenly spoke from the side. Li Si shook his head lightly, and then he looked at Yan Yi and said, I wonder if he has some other shocking trump card. If he doesn't, then the outcome is decided. At this moment, everyone was looking at Yan Yi because they wanted to see if Yan Yi had some sort of trump card. After all, Yan Yi had seemed to be always able to pleasantly surprise them throughout the competition. Did Yan Yi have any other trump card? Head fully revealed the sword control technique, sword intent, and enlightened sword heart that he possessed. So, did he have any other trump card? The answer was of course he did. Since the beginning, even Yan Yi had overlooked one thing, and that thing was his true greatest trump card. Right at this moment, Yuan Tong's figure moved. Right at the instant this happened, Yan Yi's pupils suddenly constricted, and then he didn't even give it any thought before he drew his sword and slashed. Bang! Yuan Tong had suddenly and strangely appeared in front of Yan Yi, and then his fist whistled through the air and left a string of explosions behind it as it smashed down towards Yan Yi's head. Fortunately, Yan Yi's reaction was sufficiently swift, and Head slashed his sword towards Yuan Tong's fist. A muffled bang resounded before Yan Yi's expression changed, and then an enormous blast of force came from his sword and blasted him flying. Yuan Tong's ability to blast Yan Yi flying with a single push caused all the countless spectators in the surroundings to be shocked. This is the strength of a half-step king realm expert? Yan Yi's legs moved slightly in midair, and his figure instantly stopped flying backward and descended to the ground. Yan Yi gazed at Yuan Tong while his eyes narrowed, and a wisp of a solemn expression flashed within them. In the past, he hadn't taken ordinary king realm experts seriously. Now, Yuan Tong, who was merely a half-step king realm expert, had actually been able to blast him flying with a single punch of the sword. Looks like I really was slightly proud and arrogant in the past. The king realm was extremely formidable, but there were numerous king realm experts who were very weak. He realized that he had to differentiate between the two. Yan Yi. Yuan Tong walked slowly towards Yan Yi, and he said while he walked, Needless to say, you can feel proud of your accomplishments for being able to force out all of my trump cards. Of course, I'll feel proud of myself as well. Because I, Yuan Tong, will be the first to attain the title of martial god after annihilating the Quasi-Sword Emperor. Now I'll give you an opportunity. Execute your strongest attack. Otherwise, you won't have a chance. Yan Yi let out a light breath of air, and then he gestured with his right hand, and then the green darkness sword that circled around in the sky above his head had instantly flown into his grasp. As he gazed at the violet spirit sword and green darkness sword in his hand, Yan Yi took a deep breath before his fourth-level sword intent surged out and enveloped the two swords. Under the envelopment of his sword intent, the two swords instantly started vibrating intensely. When they witnessed this scene, Both Yu Heng and Su Qingshi couldn't help but be excited because Yang Yi intended to awaken the sword's spirit that was in deep sleep within the swords. If it was in the past, Yu Heng and Su Qingshi would definitely think that Yang Yi had gone mad. But now, it was entirely possible for Yang Yi, who possessed 4th level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart, to awaken this former Dao artifact. Yuan Tong stopped and gazed at Yang Yi while a wisp of a puzzled expression flashed in his eyes. Even though he didn't know exactly what Yang Yi intended to do, his intuition told him that he was in danger. He had the intent to stop Yang Yi, but had dispelled the thought to act against Yang Yi when he thought about what Head just said. He wasn't shameless enough to go back on something that Head said in public. As Yang Yi's sword intent poured ceaselessly into the swords, they suddenly erupted with a strand of violet light and green light. After that, 2 resounding sword howls shot into the sky. Subsequently, under the astounded gazes of everyone in the surroundings, the 2 swords gradually rose into the sky before ceaselessly coiling around each other. In just a short moment, a strand of dazzling radiance suddenly erupted from the 2 swords, and then a slightly illusory and translucent little girl appeared in midair. The little girl was around 7 or 8 years of age. Her eyes were slightly closed, her face seemed as if it was like carved jade, and her hair was tied into 2 pigtails. Moreover, she wore a small linen dress that was covered in a floral print, and her jade-white feet were completely bare, causing her to seem like a little fairy that was extremely cute. Of course, the most striking feature she possessed was at the space between her brows. There was a small sword-shaped marking there, and it was like a sharp and swift sword that caused others to not dare stare directly at it. Yang Yi heaved a slight sigh of relief as he gazed at the little girl that appeared in midair. When he executed the sword control technique and summoned the green darkness sword from Su Qingshi earlier, he had a feeling that he could awaken the sword's spirit that was slumbering with violet spirit and green darkness. Sure enough, Head really succeeded. On the wall of the Imperial Palace, the excitement in the eyes of Su Qingshi and Yu Heng was impossible to conceal when they saw this illusory and translucent little girl. This Dao artifact of the sword sect is finally about to return after so many years of slumber. As he gazed at the little girl in midair, Lisi said in a low voice, "If I'm not wrong, then that is probably the sword spirit of the Azure Sword that's ranked at the 10th position on the Dao artifact rankings. According to rumor, it was heavily injured by the Ghost Sect's master all those years ago, and then it fell into a deep sleep. Moreover, the Azure Sword itself was split into 2 and vanished from the world. I never expected that it would be awakened by Yang Yi now. Even if Yang Yi's only able to bring forth 10% or 20% of its might, Yuan Tong would still be unable to resist the might he would be able to bring forth," Bai Qi suddenly said. "Would Yuan Tong allow Yang Yi to completely awaken this sword spirit?" Li Si glanced at Yuan Tong, and then he shook his head lightly. Sure enough, right when Yang Yi was about to continue awakening the sword spirit of the Azure Sword, Yuan Tong suddenly said, "Playing tricks and wasting time. I don't have the time to waste on you." As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Tong suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and then he shot explosively towards Yang Yi. Chapter 263 Impossible to Utilize. Yang Yi grunted coldly when he saw Yuan Tong shooting over explosively. With a command in his heart, the swords that were scattered all over the surroundings had instantly shot into the sky, and then they transformed into numerous rays of light that flew swiftly towards Yuan Tong. Yuan Tong's expression turned gloomy when he saw this. If Yang Yi was allowed to awaken the spirit of that Dao artifact, then it would definitely be a calamity for him. Perhaps Yang Yi would be unable to control the Dao artifact, but he didn't dare to take that risk, because the might of a Dao artifact was truly too terrifying. Moreover, this Dao artifact was a sword. So, even if he had to go back on his world, he couldn't allow Yang Yi to awaken the spirit of that Dao artifact. But it was a slight pity. Under the obstruction of the dense mass of swords, he was utterly unable to approach Yang Yi. Right when he intended to execute another heaven rank technique, the little girl that floated in midair had suddenly opened her eyes. At the moment that she opened her eyes, Everyone in the surroundings instantly fell silent, and all of their gazes shot simultaneously towards this little girl that seemed extraordinarily cute. The little girl blinked, and then she swept the crowd with her gaze before it descended onto Yan Yi in the end. She gazed at Yan Yi for a short moment before she suddenly transformed into a strand of light that appeared in front of Yan Yi. After that, she said, "It was you who awakened me." The corners of Yan Yi's mouth twitched as he gazed at this sword spirit that seemed like a human. Isn't it a little too like a person? Even though the sword spirit before him was merely a little girl, Yan Yi didn't dare look down upon her at all and hurriedly nodded right away. When she saw Yan Yi nod, the little girl nodded lightly as well, and then she said, "Fourth level sword intent, the enlightened sword heart, and you've even awakened me. You're qualified to utilize Azure. You're not one with the Azure sword?" Yan Yi was astounded. The little girl rolled her eyes at Yan Yi and said, "You idiot! You don't even know that? In the Azure sword's sword spirit, so we're naturally one. Then since you said I can utilize the Azure sword, in other words, I can utilize you as well?" Yan Yi had a slightly weird expression on his face. "Is there any problem with that?" The little girl's eyes opened wide as she gazed at Yan Yi and asked this question. Yan Yi laughed bitterly when he heard this, and he said, "How would I utilize you in your current form?" As he spoke, Yan Yi pointed at Yuan Tong, who was encircled by the swords in the distance, and said, "He's very strong, and it's very difficult for me to defeat him without a Dao artifact." The little girl glanced at Yuan Tong, and her brows suddenly knit together upon laying eyes on Yuan Tong. After that, she gazed at Yan Yi and said, "The quasi-martial god? The quasi-sword emperor?" Yan Yi shrugged and said, "I don't know about all of that. All I know is that I have to defeat him if I want to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings. Can you help me? Are there any benefits for me?" The little girl blinked as she spoke. The corners of Yan Yi's mouth twitched. Is she really just a sword spirit and not a person? She actually knows how to ask for benefits. Exactly what sort of monster have I awakened? Can we deal with him first before we discuss that? Yan Yi pointed at Yuan Tong and spoke in a slightly helpless tone. The little girl glanced at Yuan Tong, and then she looked at Yan Yi and nodded. She said, "In the past, it's usually the Sword Emperor that loses to the martial god. I hope you won't be as useless as those Sword Emperors of the past. Oh, I almost forgot. With your current strength, you're probably not even able to swing my true body once." As soon as she finished speaking, she shrugged and revealed a helpless expression. "Are you really that terrifying? And not even able to swing you once?" Yan Yi was slightly doubtful. The little girl was clearly slightly displeased by Yan Yi's doubt. She glared at Yan Yi before her figure shook, and then she transformed into a sword that floated in front of Yan Yi. This sword was a few centimeters longer than Violet Spirit or Green Darkness. One side of the sword was dark green in color, while the other was dark violet in color. Moreover, numerous strange markings were inscribed on both sides of it. If it was based on the make of this sword, then an ordinary person would definitely not think that this was the Azure sword that was ranked at the 10th position on the Dao artifact rankings. Because it was truly a bit too ordinary. As he gazed at the Azure sword before him, Yang Yi took a deep breath before he stretched out his hand and suddenly grasped its hilt. Right when he did that, an enormous bang resounded from ahead. Yang Yi raised his eyes to look over, and he saw those swords had been controlling to attack Yuan Tong had been blasted into pieces while Yuan Tong was walking slowly towards him. The corners of Yuan Tong's eyes twitched when he saw the azure sword in Yang Yi's hand. Yang Yi actually succeeded in awakening the spirit of this Dao artifact, and it was actually willing to be utilized by Yang Yi. All of this caused him to feel slight disbelief, and it was difficult for him to accept this. Because the sword spirit of every single Dao artifact was proud, and one needed formidable strength in order to control them. However, Yang Yi was merely at the first heaven realm. Right at this moment Yang Yi held azure with both hands as he raised it up slowly, and then he pointed it at Yuan Tong. Right when Yang Yi had just circulated his profound energy, his expression instantly changed while disbelief appeared in his eyes. because he noticed that as soon as he circulated his profound energy, the profound energy within his dantian had been instantly sucked dry by the azure sword. Moreover, when the profound energy within his dantian entered azure, it was like a rock that entered an ocean. There was no reaction from azure at all. At this moment, Yang Yi finally understood what the little girl meant. With the size of his profound energy reserves right now, it was utterly impossible for him to utilize a Tao artifact. When he witnessed this scene, Yuan Tong was first stunned, and then he roared madly with laughter. He laughed for a moment before he gazed at Yang Yi with a mocking expression and said, "Yang Yi, you're truly ignorant. Do you think a Tao artifact is so easy to utilize? Not to mention that you're merely at the first heaven realm. If you don't have any special methods, then it would be impossible for you to utilize a Tao artifact even after you've advanced into the King realm." On the walls of the Imperial Palace, Qin Yunzi and Kai Feng, who had unsightly expressions just now, had started smiling. After taking such pains to awaken the spirit of that Tao artifact, he's unable to utilize it in the end. What a joke. On the other hand, Yu Hing and Su Qingshi's expression had turned grim. If he's unable to utilize the Tao artifact, then how would Yang Yi resist Yuan Tong, who's already at the half-step king realm? At this moment, Yu Hing even wanted to head down to the battlefield and ask Yang Yi to admit defeat. However, he knew that it was impossible because Yang Yi wouldn't listen to him at all. "What a pity!" Li Si shook his head and said, "His cultivation is too low. If he was at the half-step king realm like Yuan Tong, and had transformed a portion of the profound energy in his body into true essence, then perhaps he would be able to utilize the azure sword. Unfortunately, his cultivation is truly too low. It really is a pity." Bai Qi agreed. "Ha ha! He awakened its sword spirit yet is unable to utilize the Tao artifact. What a joke! Yang Yi is probably aggrieved to the point of wanting to admit defeat now, right? I think that should be the case. If I were him, I would definitely feel aggrieved to the extreme. Without the Tao artifact to help him, Yang Yi should be dead this time, right? It's just a slight pity that the future Sword Emperor is going to vanish from the world just like that. The Sword Emperor, how many thousand years has it been since one has appeared in the Southern Territory? I never expected that once someone likely to become the Sword Emperor appeared, he would directly encounter the quasi-martial god. Needless to say, Yang Yi is truly pitiable." At the moment that they noticed Yang Yi was unable to utilize the azure sword, the crowd below the arena started to take pleasure in Yang Yi's misfortune because they naturally sided with Yuan Tong in this battle. Otherwise, wouldn't they be slapping their own faces if they sided with Yang Yi? Yuan Tong gazed at Yang Yi while his eyes were filled with an expression of mocking and ridicule. He said, "Yang Yi, I bet you never imagined that you would be unable to utilize it after you awakened its sword spirit. You're probably extremely aggrieved and depressed now, right?" When he spoke up to hear, Yuan Tong suddenly sighed, and then he said, "Alas, what a pity! I originally wanted to witness the might of this Tao artifact. But regretfully, I won't be able to fulfill my wish." "Is that so?" Yang Yi laughed coldly and mocked. "Wasn't it you, Yuan Tong, the future martial god, who was anxiously trying to stop me?" Yuan Tong's gaze turned icy cold when he heard this, and then he grunted coldly and said, "Stop trying to argue about it. Yang Yi, since you were able to force me, Yuan Tong, into such a state, you can feel proud even in death." Yang Yi shook his head, and then he said, "Since you want to witness the might of this Tao artifact, then it'll satisfy you." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi closed his eyes slightly and immersed his consciousness into his body. After that, he said, "I don't exactly what sort of existence you are, and I don't know what objectives you have. All I want to say is I'm at a moment of life and death. If you don't borrow your profound energy to me, then today will be the day of my death." What was Yang Yi's greatest trump card? It wasn't sword intent, nor was it the enlightened sword heart. It was the mysterious tiny vortex. It was exactly because of the tiny vortex that Yang Yi was able to undergo such tremendous changes in a short period of time. Moreover, there had been numerous moments of life and death where the tiny vortex had suddenly lent him a hand, allowing the situation to be turned around. Just as he said, he didn't know its origins or objectives. However, he knew that the tiny vortex was one with him, and it could be said that they were bound together for good and bad. Of course, it didn't mean that he would definitely die at Yuan Tong's hands if he didn't have the tiny vortex's help. Even if Yuan Tong was a half-step King Realm expert, it was still slightly impossible for Yuan Tong to kill him. If they continued fighting like this, then the most likely outcome was that both of them would suffer heavy injuries. Such an outcome was naturally not something Yan Yi wanted. In Yan Yi's opinion, he was determined to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings. Since it was like that, then it was best for him to directly utilize his biggest trump card. After a moment of silence, there was no movement from the tiny vortex. Right when Yan Yi was about to give up, the golden profound energy within the pool of profound energy in the tiny vortex had suddenly started surging. Subsequently, the golden profound energy was like a surging yellow river that shot out violently, and it flowed through the meridians in Yan Yi's body and into the azure sword in his hand. As the golden profound energy from the tiny vortex surged endlessly into the azure sword, it gradually lit up, and all the spectators in the surroundings were stunned when they witnessed this scene. Chapter 264 Defeat. As he gazed at the azure sword that was suffused with an azure glow, Qin Yunzi, who stood on the wall of the imperial palace, muttered in dejection. How could this be possible? How could he be able to utilize that Tao artifact? It wasn't just Qin Yunzi who felt disbelief, all the other great figures in the vicinity felt disbelief as well. They were clearly aware of how terrifying a Tao artifact was, and that was exactly the reason why they felt even more unable to believe this. Because a Tao artifact was absolutely not something that the profound energy of a First Heaven Realm Profounder could activate. Even if it was a King Realm Profounder, unless that Profounder was an extraordinary genius, it was absolutely impossible to utilize a Tao artifact as well. However, Yan Yi had succeeded right before their eyes. As the golden profound energy in the pool of profound energy surged ceaselessly into it, the azure sword started to tremble violently. Moreover, a faint glow gradually appeared on it. Because the vibration from it grew stronger and stronger, Yan Yi had no choice but to hold it with both hands. However, even then, Yan Yi found it difficult to control the vibrations of the sword. How could this be possible? As he gazed at Yan Yi, who held the azure sword, Yuan Tong seemed as if had lost his soul, and his eyes were filled with disbelief as he muttered. How could you possibly utilize a Tao artifact? It was a Tao artifact. Even he was unable to utilize one. Yet Yan Yi was able to do so. Did this represent that Yan Yi was a greater genius than him? When he thought up to here, Yuan Tong's expression turned savage and slightly frenzied. He gazed at Yan Yi with crimson-red eyes, and he said in a fierce voice, I don't believe it. I don't believe you're an even more monstrous genius than I, Yuan Tong, am. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and shot explosively towards Yan Yi. A wisp of a ruthless expression flashed in Yan Yi's eyes when he saw this. He held the azure sword in both hands as he slashed it downwards. In an instant, an enormous strand of golden sword chi that was around 12 m wide and over 40 m long had shot out explosively from the tip of azure. At the instant this strand of sword chi left the tip of his sword, Yan Yi felt a wave of emptiness in his entire body, and it was caused by the fact that the profound energy in his body had been completely exhausted. At the same time, a wave of dizziness instantly filled his mind, causing him to almost faint. Fortunately, he used his strong will to maintain his consciousness and stop himself from collapsing. Everywhere the strand of golden sword chi passed, space was like glass that had been struck by a hammer, and it instantly shook violently as if it was on the verge of shattering. Moreover, an enormous and bottomless gully had appeared on the ground. Yuan Tong's pupils had instantly constricted to the size of a needle when he laid eyes upon this strand of sword chi, because the terrifying energy contained within it caused his soul to tremble. However, he was utterly unable to evade it because it was truly too swift. Without the slightest bit of hesitation, Yuan Tong instantly made his profound energy surge out from his body and form a barrier. At the same time, he stretched open his palm and pushed it forward as he shouted, "Defend!" As soon as he spoke, a white energy shield instantly appeared in front of him, and as the profound energy in his body surged ceaselessly into it, the white energy shield grew more and more material before it actually seemed like a material object in the end. Under the astounded gazes of everyone, the golden strand of sword chi collided with Yuan Tong's white-colored energy shield. After a brief moment of silence, an enormous world-shaking bang resounded from the point of collision. The white energy shield instantly dispersed into nothingness while the golden sword chi didn't slow down at all as it struck Yuan Tong's profound energy barrier. Bang! An enormous bang resounded. Under the astounded gazes of everyone, the profound energy barrier that Yuan Tong formed was instantly shattered into pieces, and then he was blasted flying by the golden sword chi. He flew for around 100 m before he finally fell heavily to the ground, and his fate was unknown. The countless spectators in the surroundings gaped when they witnessed this scene, and they were dumbstruck. The expert that was said to be the most monstrous genius in the Southern Territory for the last 1,000 years, the expert said to be most likely to become the martial god, the expert who was said to be the #1 expert below the king realm, had actually lost just like this at the hands of a disciple of the sword sect that wasn't even renowned before this. I never expected that he would really defeat Yuan Tong. Li Si gazed at Yuan Tong, who lay motionlessly there while he spoke with a voice that carried dense disbelief. He said in a light voice, "Not only has he comprehended sword intent before the age of 20, but he has also improved it to the 4th level. Besides that, he has even comprehended the enlightened sword heart. Now, he utilized a Tao artifact while possessing a cultivation at the 1st heaven realm. He really is an extremely monstrous genius. This time, the sword sect's Taoist Sui, the talisman master's formation, and I were mistaken. If he's given the time, then he'll definitely become another existence like the sword sect's founding ancestor." Meanwhile, Bai Qi spoke abruptly. Bai Qi had compared Yan Yi to the founding ancestor of the sword sect, and this was undoubtedly a very high evaluation. After all those years ago, the sword sect's founding ancestor had reigned supreme throughout the world with a single sword in hand. Even the martial god of that time had been firmly suppressed by the sword sect's founding ancestor. Since the sword sect's founding ancestor had vanished from the Southern Territory, an extraordinary expert that could reign supreme over all experts had never appeared in the Southern Territory. Yet now, Bai Qi had compared Yan Yi to the founding ancestor of the sword sect, and this was sufficient to display how highly Bai Qi thought of Yan Yi. Li Si didn't refute Bai Qi. Conversely, he nodded in agreement. Right at this moment, Yan Yi suddenly started walking slowly towards Yuan Tong. However, Yan Yi walked very slowly, and his footsteps were disorderly. He was weak to the point even a weak gust of wind would be able to blow him to the ground. Utilizing the Tao artifact hadn't just completely exhausted all the profound energy within his dantian and the tiny vortex, it made him feel completely exhausted to the point he was able to arouse a shred of strength in his entire body. It could be said that even an ordinary profounder could easily kill him right now. Even though he really wanted to lie down and rest, Yan Yi hadn't forgotten about Yuan Tong. Since Yuan Tong was his enemy and was an extraordinarily monstrous genius as well, then it was best for Yuan Tong to be dead. Yan Yi didn't hope to see Yuan Tong appearing before him and causing trouble for him again in the future. When they saw Yan Yi stagger towards Yuan Tong, the spectators in the surroundings gasped. Yan Yi actually intends to kill Yuan Tong? He actually dares to kill Yuan Tong? After all, Yuan Tong is a genius disciple of the Origin School, and the Origin School is the #1 sect in the Southern Territory. Yan Yi actually dares to not give the Origin School any face? At this moment, countless people were shocked by Yan Yi's actions. Needless to say, Yan Yi was truly extremely brave to dare to kill Yuan Tong. Right when Yan Yi was merely 10 m away from Yuan Tong, Qin Yunzi suddenly appeared in front of Yuan Tong, and then he lightly waved his right hand before a light bang resounded. It was exactly this light bang that caused Yan Yi's expression to change violently. Yan Yi wasn't an idiot. He naturally knew that the Origin School wouldn't allow him to kill Yuan Tong. So, had utilized the last bit of strength he had to move the hidden sword with the sword control technique just now, and he hoped to finish off Yuan Tong with this strike. However, he hadn't succeeded in the end. Not only that, had never imagined that Qin Yunzi would actually dare to make a move against him during the Ascension rankings. Because at this very moment, the hidden sword was actually flashing towards him like a bolt of lightning at a speed that he was utterly unable to evade. Right at this moment, Li Si and Bai Qi suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi. Li Si merely stretched his right hand forward and lightly grabbed the invisible hidden sword, and then with a light swing of his right hand, it fell in front of Yang Yi. After he did all of this, Li Si gazed at Qin Yunzi and said, "Qin Yunzi, the rules of the Ascension rankings. Breaking the rules of the Ascension rankings is disrespect to my Grand Qin Empire. Those who disrespect my empire must die." Li Si hadn't finished speaking when Bai Qi had interrupted Li Si, and then he took a step forward. With a twist of his wrist, the bone broadsword appeared in his hand, and then he swiftly slashed it towards Qin Yunzi. In an instant, a strand of blade qi that was numerous times larger than Yang Yi's golden sword qi from before shot explosively towards Qin Yunzi. Qin Yunzi's expression changed slightly when he saw this. He was naturally not afraid of Bai Qi. However, had never imagined that the Empire's #1 god of slaughter would actually leave no room for discussion and directly attack him. Looks like the Grand Qin Empire is already very displeased with my origin school. When he thought up to here, Qin Yunzi's gaze turned icy cold because while the Empire was displeased with the origin school, wasn't it the same for the origin school? Qin Yunzi's figure flashed while he carried Yuan Tong, and he mysteriously appeared over 30 m away to the right to avoid that strand of blade qi. At the same time, he stretched open his right palm and swiftly slapped it down at Bai Qi. Heaven split palm! A colossal energy palm that practically enveloped the entire sky suddenly appeared here, and it carried terrifying energy as it shot swiftly at Bai Qi. Yang Yi's pupils constricted when he saw this scene. As expected of an Exalt Realm expert. When it's executed by Qin Yunzi, the heaven-split palm is countless times stronger than when it was executed by Yuan Tong. When they saw Qin Yunzi and Bai Qi had actually entered into battle, the spectators in the surroundings had hurriedly moved backward as they were deeply afraid of being affected by the battle. On the other hand, the great figures from the other sects remained silent, while none stood up to try and mediate. Because they didn't want to act impetuously and offend these two colossi, so it was best for them to watch from the sidelines. Bai Qi's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the enormous energy palm, and then his eyes instantly turned crimson red. When he saw this, Li Si's expression changed slightly. Because once Bai Qi's eyes changed color, then it represented that Bai Qi was about to go berserk. Once that happened, then the consequences would be extremely terrifying. After all, he wasn't called the god of slaughter for nothing. Li Si waved his right hand and a strand of pure white energy instantly rained down onto Bai Qi. Bai Qi's eyes instantly cleared up when he came into contact with this white-colored energy. Meanwhile, Li Si held the ruler of righteousness in his hand as he swiftly swung it towards the enormous energy palm. In an instant, a strand of white energy instantly struck the enormous energy palm. Bang! The energy palm immediately dispersed into the air. Qin Yunzi's expression changed slightly when he witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Li Si and Bai Qi suddenly appeared both in front and behind him, and both of them were gazing at him with icy cold gazes. Qin Yunzi's expression turned gloomy. He wasn't afraid of any one of them. But if it was both of them at once, then he would be in danger. Right at this moment, a middle-aged man in a white robe suddenly and mysteriously appeared by Qin Yunzi's side. Bai Qi and Li Si's expressions changed violently when they saw this middle-aged man, whereas Qin Yunzi heaved a sigh of relief. After that, Qin Yunzi bowed slightly to the middle-aged man and said, "Sect Master!" When they heard Qin Yunzi, the countless spectators in the surroundings were shocked. This middle-aged man before us is actually the sect master of the Origin School, Yuan Tian? Yuan Tian glanced at Qin Yunzi before he directly disregarded both Li Si and Bai Qi, and then his gaze descended onto Yang Yi as he said, "Fourth level of sword intent, the enlightened sword heart, and a physical body that isn't inferior to a first heaven realm body refiner of the ancient times. You're really not bad. Are you willing to join my origin school? Chapter 265 The Overlords Gather. When they heard Yuan Tian, the expressions of Kai Feng, Su Qingshi, Yu Heng, Li Si, and Bai Qi had instantly changed. All of them had never imagined that Yuan Tian would actually try to rope Yang Yi in. After all, the origin school's Qin Yunzi intended to kill Yang Yi just a moment ago. Qin Yunzi had never imagined that Yuan Tian would actually try to recruit Yang Yi, and his expression immediately turned slightly unsightly. Because Yuan Tian's actions were slightly insulting to him. Even though he was displeased in his heart, he wasn't stupid enough to reveal it. Yang Yi was stunned as well. Had never expected that this expert who was on the same level as Taoist Sui would actually ask him if he was willing to join the origin school. After a moment of deep contemplation, Yang Yi raised his head to look at Yuan Tian as he said, "If I join the origin school, then can the origin school save my mother?" So long as his mother could be saved, then not to mention joining the origin school, Yang Yi would even have any objections if he was asked to join the ghost sect. Yuan Tian frowned slightly. Right at this moment, roaring laughter suddenly resounded, and then Taoist Sui appeared mysteriously in front of Yuan Tian. He glanced at Yang Yi before he looked at Yuan Tian and said, "Yuan Tian, Yang Yi is a disciple of my sword sect. As the sect master of the origin school, isn't it a little low for you to try and recruit a disciple of the sword sect in public?" "Ha ha! According to my knowledge, Yang Yi seems to have been expelled from your sect, right?" Right at this moment, Bai Shan from the Talisman Masters Association suddenly appeared in the sky. Bai Shan nodded lightly to Yang Yi, who resided on the ground below, and then he said, "What? Old geezer Zui, you intend to recruit Yang Yi back into the sword sect now that you've seen that he possesses potential?" Right at this moment, a beautiful woman that wore a dress embroidered with flower patterns had suddenly appeared in the sky. When she appeared in the sky above, Taoist Sui and Yuan Tian's gazes instantly descended onto her. As they gazed at her, a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in both of their eyes. The beautiful woman paid no attention to Yuan Tian and Taoist Sui. She gazed at Yang Yi and a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in her eyes. She said, "You're really not bad. Phone, you gave birth to a good son." When he heard this, Yang Yi knew that it was very likely that this beautiful woman was the master of the Flower Palace. He immediately said, "Senior, according to the rules of the Ascension rankings, the person that obtains the first position will obtain the Ascension token, and the Ascension token allows its bearer to make a request from all the 6 great powers and the Grand Qin Empire, right?" The beautiful woman spoke indifferently. "You want my Flower Palace to let your mother go?" Yang Yi hurriedly nodded. "No." The beautiful woman's voice carried a firm and indisputable tone. Yang Yi's expression sank when he heard this, and then he asked, "Even if I hand over the Ascension token in exchange?" The beautiful woman said, "Violation of the palace's rules is intolerable. Your mother violated the rules of the palace and betrayed it. If I forgive such a serious crime, then the disciples of my Flower Palace will think that they can get lucky too. If everyone learns from your mother's example, then how would my Flower Palace maintain its foothold in the Southern Territory?" Yang Yi remained silent for a short moment before he said, "Then I'll utilize the Ascension token to request that the Flower Palace reduces my mother's punishment. Is that all right?" Even though Head expected that the Flower Palace would refuse, a strand of vicious emotions had swiftly swept through his heart when he heard the woman refuse. However, Head suppressed it because he couldn't shed all pretenses and go against the Flower Palace right now. The beautiful woman stared at Yang Yi before she said, "I know what your objective is. But I should tell you that your intentions to shake my Flower Palace is undoubtedly wishful thinking. Even though your natural talent is extremely monstrous, the resources and reserves of my Flower Palace isn't something that you can imagine. Of course, you'll definitely be a threat to my Flower Palace once you've grown. For the sake of preventing my Flower Palace from facing another problem, I've decided to eliminate you right now." As soon as she finished speaking, she looked at Taoist Zui and Yuan Tian before she said, "Both of you should be aware of my Flower Palace's rules. Since the founding ancestors set such rules, then everyone within the Flower Palace, I included, are unable to violate it. The palace rules are the foundation that my Flower Palace stands on. So, no matter which one of you takes him in, my Flower Palace will take your sect to be a mortal enemy. Moreover, I'll personally make a move to kill this kid." Even she couldn't avoid fearing Yang Yi's natural talent. If Yang Yi was allowed to grow, then the Flower Palace would definitely face great danger. So, her attitude towards Yuan Tian and Taoist Zui seemed extremely firm. Because she had to eliminate Yang Yi before he could grow. Both of them fell silent when they heard the beautiful woman. Yang Yi's natural talent really was very terrifying, and if Yang Yi was given the time, then he would absolutely become an extraordinary expert. However, that was only a matter of the future. Yet now, if they took Yang Yi in, then it represented their sects becoming mortal enemies with the Flower Palace. It was akin to going against an extraordinary power right now for the sake of possessing an extraordinary expert in the future. Yuan Tian glanced at Yang Yi while a wisp of pity flashed in his eyes. After that, he waved his right hand, and he vanished on the spot with Qin Yunzi and Yuan Tong. At the same time, a shrill cry suddenly resounded. Everyone in the surroundings was astounded. When they looked over, they saw a bloody arm had suddenly appeared where Yuan Tian stood just now. Violating the rules of the Ascension rankings is intolerable. My origin school's Qin Yunzi broke the rules, so I sever an arm of his. Moreover, he won't make another appearance in the Southern Territory for the next 50 years. Right when everyone felt puzzled, Yuan Tian's voice suddenly resounded, and they immediately came to an understanding. They said to themselves, "The rules of the Ascension rankings really are strict and terrifying. Even an Exalt Realm elder of the Origin School who broke the rules suffered such severe punishment. In the future, those that didn't possess a certain level of backing would definitely not dare to violate the rules of the Ascension rankings." Yuan Tian had given up on Yang Yi, and only Taoist Zui and Bai Shan remained here. The beautiful woman looked at Taoist Zui and said indifferently, "You ought to be clearly aware of the Sword Sect's current situation. If my Flower Palace becomes a mortal enemy of your Sword Sect, then I think the Sword Sect will fall from the ranks of the 6 great powers even with your presence in the Sword Sect. Moreover, if I'm not wrong, you probably have to try and overcome the Heva path soon." Taoist Zui's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He fell silent for a moment before he sighed in the end. Yang Yi's natural talent really shocked him, and if the Sword Sect had Yang Yi, then it would definitely be able to regain its former glory in the future. However, if he really took Yang Yi in and had to try to overcome the Heva path, then not to mention regaining its former glory, just surviving would be a problem for the Sword Sect. After he glanced at Yang Yi with slight regret, his figure flashed and vanished mysteriously on the spot. Once Taoist Zui left, only Bai Shan from the Talisman Masters Association remained here. The beautiful woman's gaze descended onto Bai Shan before she said, "President Bai, my Flower Palace has never had the intention to become enemies with the Talisman Masters Association. If Yang Yi was still a member of the Talisman Masters Association, then I would give President Bai some face and allow him to leave. However, if I'm not wrong, then Yang Yi isn't a member of the Talisman Masters Association anymore, right?" Bai Shan was speechless. He hadn't expected that this woman before him would actually know this piece of information as well. At the same time, he felt slightly regretful in his heart. He regretted abandoning Yang Yi on that day and allowing this woman to have an excuse now. The Talisman Masters Association wasn't afraid of the Flower Palace, but if he were to insist on protecting Yang Yi now, then it would undoubtedly be a slap to the Flower Palace's face. He had no doubt that the Talisman Masters Association would definitely suffer the frenzied revenge of the Flower Palace. The consequences of forming irreconcilable enmity with a colossus like the Flower Palace and fighting it to the death wasn't something that he could endure. Bai Shan sighed lightly, and then he didn't say another word. His figure flashed and vanished on the spot. A genius' true value only displayed itself in the future. In the end, Yang Yi was only a first heaven realm profounder right now. Even if he was an extraordinarily monstrous genius, the future was full of possibilities. Yan Yi might become an extraordinary figure like the founding ancestor of the, or he could die prematurely. In short, if he invested in Yan Yi, then he would only gain returns in the future. If the Flower Palace didn't exist in this equation, then the Origin School, Sword Sect, and the Talisman Masters Association would be extremely willing to place such an investment. However, since the Flower Palace existed in this equation, the price they had to pay for this investment was something that they couldn't bear at all, nor did they want to bear it. Yan Yi watched coldly as all of this happened, and he didn't say anything. Because it was pointless for him to say anything before these extraordinary experts. In the past, he felt that so long as he revealed his potential, then someone wouldn't hesitate to offend the Flower Palace and invest in him. At this moment, he finally realized that the way he thought was mistaken. Now, he understood that potential really wasn't that important to these extraordinary experts. Because they who had experienced countless years of time had witnessed the growth and premature deaths of too many extraordinary geniuses. Yan Yi had potential, and his potential was extremely huge. However, all of that was a matter of the future. Even Taoist Sui and Yuan Tian didn't dare guarantee how long Yan Yi could live for if the Flower Sect's master pursued Yan Yi. After Bai Shan left, the beautiful woman's gaze descended onto Yan Yi, and she said, "Will you take your own life, or should I?" Helplessness, extraordinary helplessness. This was what Yang Yi felt at this moment. When he faced this beautiful woman, he knew that he didn't have any chance. Not even the chance to flee. Because the gap between him and the beautiful woman was truly too huge. Yang Yi took a deep breath, looked directly at her and said, "I know I have no chance to survive, but I still want to say that if I, Yan Yi, survive, then it'll definitely annihilate your Flower Palace in my lifetime. It'll end the lives of all the disciples of your Flower Palace, and it'll make the Flower Palace cease to exist in the Southern Territory." The beautiful woman laughed coldly and said, "You won't have the chance." As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her hand casually, and a fine flower petal shot violently towards Yang Yi at a speed he was unable to evade. The petal was very small, but the force contained within it was extremely terrifying. Everywhere it passed, a fine and pitch-black rift was instantly torn open in space. Chapter 266: The Ancient Battlefield? Yan Yi wanted to resist, but the might and speed of that petal wasn't something he could resist at all. With his current strength, all he could do before this tiny petal was wait for death to arrive. Even though there was boundless rage and unwillingness in his heart, but he couldn't do anything about it. In this world where the strong were respected, there were numerous times when experts didn't have to abide by the rules. Just like this very moment, this beautiful woman from the Flower Palace was able to disregard the rules of the Ascension rankings and make a move against him before the competition had even come to an end. The strong could do as they pleased while the weak could only resign themselves to being bullied. Clang! Suddenly, a strand of sword chi tore through the air and shot at the petal. It was none other than Su Qingshi who'd remained silent until now. Even though she knew that she was no match for the beautiful woman, she still couldn't just stand there and watch Yang Yi die before her. So she'd acted. When she saw Su Qingshi attack, the beautiful woman spoke in a cold and indifferent tone. "You overestimate your ability." The strand of sword chi that Su Qingshi executed had been blasted into dispersal as soon as it came into contact with the petal, and the petal shot towards Yang Yi at an even swifter speed. Su Qingshi was astounded. Right when it was merely a centimeter away from the center of Yang Yi's forehead, it suddenly and shockingly stopped there, and the beautiful woman's expression changed slightly when she witnessed this scene. Right at this moment, a middle-aged man who wore a yellow robe embroidered with 9 golden dragons appeared by Yang Yi's side. Moreover, Qin Xie had arrived by this middle-aged man's side as well. The middle-aged man glanced at Yang Yi, who still remained calm and composed without revealing even a trace of fear, and then he nodded lightly while a wisp of admiration flashed in his eyes. He said, The best way to test a person's attainments and natural talent in the sword Tao is through that person's reaction at the instant before death. You were able to remain calm before danger and fearless of death while facing an expert that's countless times stronger than you. As expected of one who has attained the enlightened sword heart. Even though Yan Yi didn't know who this person was, Yan Yi owed this person his life. So, just out of consideration for this, Yan Yi couldn't be disrespectful to this person. He immediately bowed slightly to the middle-aged man and said, "Death, it's naturally something that I'm afraid of because I still have countless things that I want to do. But what can fear do? Instead of showing fear and incurring the disdain and ridicule of others, isn't it better to face it calmly? Even if it's death, one should die bravely." The middle-aged man grinned and said, "Your disposition isn't bad, your natural talent isn't bad, and you possess a loyal character. As expected of someone that Xie has taken a liking to. Her actions of breaking the rules of the palace to ask me to save you weren't taken in vain." Yan Yi was stunned when he heard this, and then he looked at Qin Xie while warmth filled his heart. He hadn't imagined that it was actually Qin Xie who asked this expert to save him. So, Yang Yi instantly felt ashamed in his heart when he thought about how had doubted Qin Xie before this. Qin Xie walked over to Yang Yi's side, and then she said, "This is my imperial grandfather." Yang Yi was shocked when he heard this. This middle-aged man is the founding emperor. Didn't the rumors say that the founding emperor has locked himself behind closed doors to cultivate? Why has he come out here? When he thought about what the founding emperor said about Qin Xie breaking the rules of the palace, Yan Yi's heart sank. Even though Qin Xie was a princess, it was probably extremely difficult for her to meet the founding emperor, and he didn't know what sort of price Qin Xie had paid to actually be able to ask this extraordinary expert to abandon his cultivation. Founding emperor, what's the meaning of this? Right when Yang Yi was in deep thought, the beautiful woman spoke in a cold voice. What's the meaning of this? The founding emperor chuckled and said, "You Linglong, first you disregarded the rules of the ascension rankings that were set by my Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers, and then you attacked to kill within the imperial capital of my Grand Qin Empire. I want to ask you the same question as well." Yu Linglong's beautiful brows knit together, and then she said in a low voice, "Founding Emperor, you intend to protect Yang Yi?" He grinned, and then he pointed at Qin Xie and Yang Yi before he said, "He's my granddaughter's husband. In other words, he can be considered to be a member of my Grand Qin Empire. Yu Linglong, do you think I would allow you to kill him in the imperial capital? Founding Emperor, you intend to go against my flower palace?" Yu Linglong's voice turned cold. "If you insist on thinking in that way, then it's not out of the question," said the founding emperor. Yu Linglong's face sank when she heard this. The Grand Qin Empire had the intention to act against the sects since a long time ago. Unfortunately, it had constantly lacked an excuse. If the Flower Palace were to make the first move against the Grand Qin Empire, then it would undoubtedly be giving the Empire an excuse. At that time, the Empire could act against the Flower Palace in a perfectly justified manner. She didn't know exactly how strong the Grand Qin Empire was, but it was definitely much stronger than her Flower Palace. So, it wasn't worth it to fight such a colossus to the death just for Yang Yi. Moreover, she would have plenty of opportunities to kill Yang Yi in the future, so why be impatient now? When she thought up to here, Yu Linglong glanced coldly at Yang Yi before she said, "Founding Emperor, I hope you'll always be there to protect him. He'll be representing my empire at the ancient battlefield." Right at this moment, the founding emperor had spoken abruptly. Yu Linglong's expression changed slightly, and then she glanced deeply at the founding emperor. The founding emperor suddenly said, "Palace Master Yu, let's make a deal, all right?" "What deal?" Yu Linglong frowned slightly. The founding emperor pointed at Yang Yi and said, "He can be considered to be half a member of the Qin household now, and his mother can be considered to be a relative of my imperial household. Of course, I'm aware of the rules of your palace, so I won't ask you to let his mother go. I only ask that you're able to allow his mother to live for 5 more years. Moreover, the Flower Palace is prohibited from dispatching experts at the Exalt realm and above against Yang Yi. For the sake of this, my Grand Qin Empire will give the human resources of a state to the Flower Palace. What do you think, Palace Master Yu? Yu Linglong's eyelids twitched. The human resources of a state. To think that he's willing to make such a sacrifice. After a moment of silence, Yu Linglong said, Deal. His mother will live for 5 years. I hope you don't go back on your word. Yu Linglong wasn't an idiot. She would naturally not refuse to obtain the human resources of an entire state in exchange for allowing a disciple and a first heaven realm profounder to live for 5 more years. Of course I want. The founding ancestor grinned as he spoke. Yu Linglong didn't stay here any longer. Her figure flashed, and she brought all the members of the Flower Palace along with her as she vanished from the square. When he saw Yu Linglong leave, the founding ancestor looked at Li Si and said, You can announce that the Ascension rankings has come to an end. Li Si bowed slightly to the founding emperor, and then he looked at the crowd and said loudly, The winner of the Ascension rankings, the Grand Qin Empire's Yan Yi. There were no claps or cheers from below, and there was only silence. Because they'd never imagined that Yan Yi would be able to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings. However, it was a fact that he had crushed the #1 monstrous genius of the Southern Territory, Yuan Tong, in order to obtain the first position. Under the arrangements of the Grand Qin Empire, Yan Yi's name was like a plague that swept through the entire Southern Territory. At the same time, Yan Yi obtained a nickname, the Quasi-Sword Emperor. Why was he called the Quasi-Sword Emperor? Because Yan Yi hadn't gone to Sword Emperor Mountain to obtain the acknowledgement of the mysterious ancient Shi there. The first on the Ascension rankings and the Quasi-Sword Emperor. Yan Yi didn't care about all of this. He was just slightly at a loss. He was truly slightly at a loss when it came to the Colossus that was the Flower Palace. Even if he was given 100 years of time, he would probably be unable to resist the Flower Palace by relying on his own strength. But the problem was that his mother only had 5 years of time. So, how should he save her? Under the orders of the founding emperor, all the profounders on the square had been sent away by the troops of the empire. At this moment, only Yan Yi, the founding emperor, and Qin Siye remained here. The founding emperor suddenly said, It isn't impossible for you to save your mother. Yan Yi was shocked when he heard this, and then he raised his head to look at the founding emperor, while his voice carried anxiousness. He said, Please provide me with your guidance, senior. Annihilate the Flower Palace, said the founding emperor in a flat voice. Yan Yi laughed bitterly when he heard this and said, I want to do that as well. But senior, do you think I can annihilate the Flower Palace? If he was able to annihilate it, then he would have done it a long time ago. Unfortunately, he couldn't. If you intend to accomplish it with your own strength, then you probably need the strength that the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect possessed all those years ago. Otherwise, even if you attain my level of cultivation, you would still be unable to annihilate the Flower Palace, the founding emperor said. The resources, reserves, and strength of the Flower Palace exceeds your imagination. Then, the founding emperor shook his head and said, You can't, but my Grand Qin Empire has the required strength. What price must I pay? Yan Yi wasn't stupid. He knew that it was absolutely impossible for the founding ancestor to save him merely because of Qin Siye, and he wasn't aware of the exact reason. Represent the empire at the ancient battlefield. The founding ancestor's expression was slightly solemn. The ancient battlefield? Yan Yi was puzzled because had never heard of such a place. The founding emperor suddenly said, My empire and the 6 great powers have always been in harmony only in appearance, yet we've remained without conflict for so long. Do you know why? It's because of the Dark Beast Empire? Asked Yan Yi. Then do you know why the Dark Beast Empire and we humans have been living peacefully until now even though we're both hostile against each other? Asked the founding emperor. Yan Yi shook his head. Because we humans and the Dark Beast have an even stronger enemy. The founding emperor looked towards the north and said, There's a mountain range at the northernmost area of the Dark Beast Empire, and it's called Heaven Tower Mountain Range. This mountain range is extremely and over 1,000,000 kilometers wide. There's an extremely formidable race of beings living on the other side of this mountain range. They possess an innate advantage that both humans and dark beasts don't. Not only are they able to cultivate combat techniques, but their physical bodies are also stronger than dark beasts. They are the devil race. The devil race? Yang Yu was puzzled. The founding emperor nodded lightly and said, "They're blessed by the heavens. Every single young man of the devil race that has come of age wouldn't have to intentionally temper the body, yet their physical strength and defense would be even stronger than ordinary king-rank dark beasts. Besides that, they are able to cultivate the various combat techniques that only we humans are able to cultivate. The geniuses of our human race can't be called geniuses in front of them at all. For example, if Yuan Tong was placed amongst the younger generation of the devil race, then he can be considered as outstanding at most." Yang Yu was shocked when he heard the founding emperor's last sentence. Even though Yuan Tong had lost to him, Yuan Tong's strength was extremely formidable. If he hadn't awakened the sword spirit of the Azure Sword and utilized the tiny vortex, then the outcome of the battle between him and Yuan Tong would probably be uncertain. But it was exactly such an extraordinary expert that could only be considered as outstanding amongst the devil race. Chapter 267 The Rewards of the Ascension Rankings. Yang Yi said, "Senior, since the devil race is so formidable, then why have I never heard of it nor seen any of their members in the Southern Territory?" "That's naturally because my Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers work together to conceal it," the founding emperor said. "The devil race is an enormous threat to both our human race and the dark beasts. If it wasn't for the Heaven Tower mountain range acting as a barrier, the current owners of the Southern Territory would probably not be our human race and the dark beasts. It would be the devil race instead. Since there's the Heaven Tower mountain range there, then what's the ancient battlefield?" Yang Yu was puzzled. Every single year, countless youths from the devil race would climb over Heaven Tower mountain range on foot. Most of these youths would perish while climbing over the mountain range. However, so long as they succeeded, then their strength and natural talent would absolutely be horrifying. To put it simply, if you and Yuan Tong were asked to climb over that mountain range, then with the natural talent and strength both of you possess, both of you would only have a 30% chance at most, said the founding emperor. Yang Yi was shocked. With the founding emperor's identity and strength, since Head said they had a 30% chance, then they probably really had a mere 30% chance. While both he and Yuan Tong only had a 30% chance of success, those youths of the devil race were able to climb over the mountain range instead. Moreover, it was more than one. So, such natural talent and strength. Yang Yi took a deep breath, suppressed the shock in his heart, and then he asked, "Why have they come to our human world? To temper themselves?" The founding ancestor said in a low voice. "The devil race is a race that respects the strong. Climbing over Heaven Tower mountain range is a form of tempering, and the battles between them and the geniuses of the younger generation of our human race is a form of tempering as well. The objective behind their actions is naturally to allow themselves to become stronger. Of course, besides becoming stronger, exhausting the number of geniuses in the younger generation of our human race is probably another one of the Devil Exalt's objectives." The Devil Exalt. Yang Yi was shocked again when he heard this name, because Head heard of the Devil Exalt from Inxiener. However, he hadn't imagined that the number one expert in the Southern Territory would actually not be a human profounder but a member of the Devil race. "Do you know why we held the Ascension rankings?" asked the founding emperor. Yang Yi shook his head. "Because we wanted to choose strong profounders to head to the ancient battlefield. It isn't just these independent cultivators of the Southern Territory that will be heading to the ancient battlefield, even the disciples of the various great powers and the elites of the Dark Beast Empire will be going as well. All of you have a single mission, and it's to do your best to annihilate those young geniuses of the devil race," said the founding emperor in a low voice. Yang Yi remained silent for a short while before he said, "Since Senior paid such a huge price to save me and allow my mother to live for 5 more years, it's naturally impossible for your objective behind it to be so simple as merely representing the Grand Qin Empire to fight the youths of the devil race, right? The founding emperor chuckled and said, "It isn't so complicated. Besides, out of consideration for the fact that you're the one this little girl has taken a liking to, it's also because my empire will fight the Flower Palace sooner or later. Of course, if you didn't possess natural talent that I thought highly of, then I would naturally not pay such a huge price. Since you have natural talent and potential while my empire would be fighting the Flower Palace sooner or later, then why shouldn't I rescue you and make the Flower Palace have another terrifying genius who possesses great potential as its enemy? But heading to the ancient battlefield doesn't seem to benefit the empire at all, right?" asked Yang Yi. "Of course it does," the founding emperor said. "Even though there's only a slim chance of survival, heading to the ancient battlefield is an opportunity for the members of my imperial household to grow stronger. If the members of my imperial household die at the hands of the youths from the devil race because their strengths were inferior, then they deserve death. However, you ought to be aware of the relationship between my empire and the 6 great powers. I'm worried that the members of my imperial household would perish at the hands of the disciples from the 6 great powers instead." "You want me to protect the disciples of the imperial household?" Yang Yi frowned as he spoke. The founding emperor nodded lightly and said, "Because we have an agreement with the Devil Exalt, and experts at the spirit realm and above can't make an appearance at the ancient battlefield. So, my empire is utterly unable to dispatch experts to protect the members of the imperial household from the shadows. On the other hand, once they make an appearance at the ancient battlefield, then the 6 great powers would definitely join forces against them. So, I need your help. Besides that, it's extremely beneficial for you to head to the ancient battlefield as well. After all, it's an ancient ruin, and even though it's filled with all sorts of dangers, that place is filled with all sorts of fortuitous encounters as well. Moreover, there are countless experts to be your sparring partners there. Isn't that exactly what you need right now?" Yang Yi shook his head slowly and said, "Senior, I want to become strong for the sake of rescuing my mother. If I can't rescue my mother, then would there be any point in it even if I, Yang Yi, become the #1 expert in the Southern Territory?" The founding emperor grinned and said, "I understand your worries. Don't worry, since Yu Linglong has made a deal with me, then she will naturally not go back on her word. Your mother will definitely be fine for the next 5 years of time. As for 5 years from now..." When he spoke up to here, the founding emperor paused for a moment and said, "If you want to save your mother, then you must ceaselessly strengthen yourself during these 5 years of time. The matters of the world are ever changing. If you don't become stronger, then perhaps you might vanish from the world tomorrow. Then, who would rescue your mother?" Yang Yi fell silent when he heard this. "Right, in short, it's because my strength is too weak. I received the founding emperor's help today and was able to survive the Flower Palace's master, but what about the next time? Who would help me then? Become stronger! Become stronger!" At this moment, Yang Yi urgently desired to become stronger. Because only by becoming stronger would he be able to survive. Only by surviving would he have the opportunity to rescue his mother. "Senior, when will I be heading to the ancient battlefield?" asked Yang Yi. When he saw Yang Yi stop being obsessed about rescuing his mother, the founding emperor grinned and said, "The ancient battlefield will be opened a month from now. At that time, my Grand Qin Empire will notify all the profounders that possess sufficient strength, the disciples of the countless clans in the empire, and some of the elite troops of my empire that they should gather here. After that, they'll be teleported to the ancient battlefield via the teleportation formation here." "Senior intends to dispatch the army there?" Yang Yi was astounded. The founding emperor nodded lightly and said, "Even though it's extremely dangerous to them, it's an enormous opportunity as well. It's an opportunity to become stronger. Of course, the elite forces will head to the ancient battlefield as independent cultivators. Otherwise, they would probably die at the hands of humans before they can even fight the youths of the devil race." Yang Yi shook his head. "The human race still intends to kill each other while facing the threat of such a terrifying existence. The human race is really courting death. However, it wasn't related to him at all. try your best not to leave the imperial capital during this month. It isn't just the Flower Palace that intends to kill you now, even the Origin School and Ghost Sect probably intend to eliminate you as well," said the founding emperor. Yan Yi nodded. "Heading to the ancient battlefield is a new beginning for you. Because there are no experts at the spirit realm and above there. So, you can swiftly improve your strength there, and only there would you be able to freely improve your strength without worrying about the other powers dispatching extraordinary experts to kill you. So, make good use of this opportunity." After he finished saying all of this, the founding emperor's figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After the founding emperor left, Yang Yi turned around to look at Qin Xie, who had been silent until now, and he said, "Thank you?" Qin Xie shook her head and smiled before she said, "You don't have to thank me. If you didn't comprehend 4th level sword intent, if you didn't possess the enlightened sword heart, and if you didn't defeat Yuan Tong, then my imperial grandfather wouldn't have saved you. You ought to be very clearly aware of that." Right when Yang Yi was about to say something, Li Si suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then he nodded slightly to Qin Xie before he gazed at Yang Yi. With a flip of his palm, a spatial ring had appeared in his palm, and he said, "This is the reward for the first on the Ascension rankings. Besides that, young brother Yang's name has probably spread throughout the Southern Territory by now. So if it's possible, then try your best not to use your true name in front of outsiders. After all, there are numerous people that want to kill you." Yang Yi nodded, and then he received the spatial ring and said, "Thank you for the reminder, Senior." Li Si grinned and said, "Don't mention it. Since you're Princess Xie's husband, then you're a member of my Grand Qin Empire. Even though you can't hold a position in the imperial court." When he spoke up to here, 2 command tokens appeared in Li Si's palm, and he said, "One of these 2 command tokens is the Ascension token, the reward from the Ascension rankings. The other is a token from the founding emperor. You can travel freely through the empire with this token in your possession. Moreover, you can mobilize the guards of all the cities except the imperial capital." Yang Yi was shocked when he heard this. Mobilize the guards from all the cities? Why would the founding emperor give me such huge authority? After pondering deeply for a moment, Yang Yi didn't refuse it and accept the 2 command tokens. He gazed at the Ascension and pondered deeply for a brief moment before he grunted coldly. Had taken great pains to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings, all for the sake of this Ascension token. However, when he finally obtained it now, it was like a piece of scrap metal. Li Si nodded lightly when he saw Yang Yi accept the command tokens, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After Li Si left, Yang Yi passed the command tokens to Qin Xie and said, "These 2 command tokens are no different than scrap metal in my possession, and they ought to be of use in yours." Qin Xie glanced at the 2 command tokens before she said, "You really intend to give them to me? Do you know their uses? Especially that token from my imperial grandfather. With that in your possession, the authority you possess wouldn't be inferior to a general with actual authority." Yang Yi shook his head and said, "What a joke! Should I take the Ascension token and request something from the Origin School or the Ghost Sect? Or perhaps the Flower Palace? I would thank the heavens if they didn't come looking for me, whereas, going to look for them would be like courting death. As for the founding emperor's token, he'll be heading to the ancient battlefield soon. Can I mobilize the guards of the empire to head to the ancient battlefield with me? So, they are no different than pieces of scrap metal to me, and they'll only be put to the best use in your hands." Chapter 268 Return the Azure Sword? After she received the 2 command tokens, Qin Xie gazed at Yang Yi and said, "You must come back alive. Otherwise, I'll take the treasures you gave me and marry another man." Yang Yi was speechless. Such a threat is truly extraordinarily great. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he flipped his palm. The 2 Earth-rank treasures he obtained from killing Qin Yuran and Li Xianjun appeared in his palm. He said, "Take these 2 things as well. Don't refuse, because the finances needed to establish a power that can go against the Flower Palace is absolutely not something you can bear. I'll craft some talismans for you during this month of time." am unable to help you in any other aspect. The only thing I can do is provide financial assistance to you. Qin Xie smiled sweetly as she received the earth-rank treasures, and then she said, "Why would I refuse? I'm working for you right now, so you naturally have to resolve the issue of funding." Yang Yi smiled as well, and then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Is your mother all right?" Qin Xie restrained her smile and nodded before she said, "Because of you, her position in the palace is merely inferior to the highest-ranking imperial concubines. Moreover, my status has improved greatly as well. Presently, the treatment I receive isn't inferior to any prince or princess. In short, little brother, all of this is because of you. So, how do you think big sister should repay you? Should I devote my body to you? Pledge your body to me? That's something that can be considered." Qin Xie was stunned, and then she roared with laughter. As she roared with laughter, the ample peaks on her chest started shaking, and the sight of this caused Yang Yi to shudder slightly. Yang Yi suppressed the feelings in his heart before he flipped his palm, and the 2 high-rank technique talismans that were part of the rewards from the Ascension rankings had appeared in his palm. He passed them to her and said, "Don't auction off these high-rank technique talismans. Keep them to protect yourself." Qin Xie stopped laughing. She gazed at Yang Yi for a short while before she shook her head and sighed in the end. She said, "Little brother, you have a resolute and decisive character, but you have a lethal flaw. You don't hold back at all once you trust someone. After all, the thing that's easiest to change in the world is the hearts of people. So, no matter who it is, even if it's towards your loved ones, you should hold back a little, understand?" Yang Yi smiled, and then he said, "Don't worry, I know who to trust and who not to trust." Indeed, the number of people Yang Yi trusted in this world could be counted with a single hand. Qin Xie glanced at him and didn't continue on this topic. She said, "I'll gather information related to the ancient battlefield and devil race in the next few days, and I'll contact you when I'm done. Besides that, don't try to contact me yourself and don't head to the Immortal Indulgence Pavilion. After all, countless powers have targeted you, and I don't want the things I established with great pains to be exposed because of you." Yang Yi nodded to display his understanding. Qin Xie left, and she left with some of the treasures he gathered in the Grand Myriad Mountains. In Yang Yi's opinion, besides combat techniques and sword-type treasures, all other treasures were of no use. Yang Yi shook his head, withdrew the spatial ring Li Si gave him, and then glanced through the treasures within it. Yang Yi was instantly delighted when he saw the earth-rank treasure within it because it was a sword. After the battle with Yuan Tong, Yang Yi noticed that a flaw of the sword chest, and it was that the swords within it were of too inferior quality. If all the 36 swords within it were earth-rank swords, then not to mention Yuan Tong, even 10 Yuan Tongs would be unable to resist its might once it was enhanced by sword intent. However, it wasn't that easy to transform those 36 swords into earth-rank swords. Even though it was extremely difficult, it wasn't a hopeless cause. Because with the mysterious tiny vortex and Yang Yi's own wealth, gathering 36 earth-rank swords was only a matter of time. On the other hand, the earth-rank technique was a palm technique called Stardrop Palm. Supposedly, its might could make the stars in the sky fall to the earth. Yang Yi naturally didn't believe it because, not to mention an earth-rank technique, even a heaven-rank technique was unable to make a star fall from the sky. However, Yang Yi was considerably satisfied with this technique because while its might was inferior to the Dragon Breaker, it had a benefit, which was the difficulty to cultivate. It wasn't as terrifying as the Dragon Breaker. The Dragon Breaker had 3 levels. With the strength of Yang Yi's physical body and coupled with Elder Mu's guidance, had merely cultivated it to the 1st level. Even Yang Yi couldn't help but say that the difficulty of cultivating it was truly abnormal. Besides the dark treasure and combat technique, there were 100 top-grade energy stones. If it were ordinary energy stones, then Yang Yi would naturally not attach any importance to them. However, they were top-grade energy stones, so even Yang Yi had no choice but to value them. After all, according to the market value of things, a single top-grade energy stone was equivalent to 1,000 energy stones. Moreover, it was a treasure that could rarely be purchased readily. 100 top-grade energy stones were equivalent to 100,000 energy stones. So, when these 100 top-grade energy stones were included in his existing wealth, then it could be said that even some Exalt Realm experts weren't as wealthy as Yan Yi. In short, Yan Yi was very satisfied with the rewards of the Ascension rankings, because these rewards could greatly improve his strength, and what he needed now was exactly to ceaselessly improve his strength. Right at this moment, Yan Yi suddenly turned around and looked behind him. Su Qingshi had suddenly appeared there. When he thought about how this woman before him hadn't hesitated to make a move against the palace master of the Flower Palace earlier, Yan Yi's heart felt warm, and he said, "I thought you'd return to the Sword Sect." Su Qingshi shook her head slightly. She pondered deeply for a short while before she said, "I'm very sorry for what the Sword Sect did to you. That has nothing to do with you." Yan Yi smiled as he said, "You are you, and the Sword Sect is the Sword Sect. Even though the Sword Sect betrayed me, you've never done so. My feelings towards you have never changed. I don't have the strength to change a lot of things now, but I guarantee that such a day will come. At that time, I'll head to the Sword Sect to look for you. I guarantee that it won't be too long from now." Su Qingshi stared at Yan Yi for a short while before she said, "I'll be waiting for you in the Sword Sect." As soon as she finished speaking, Su Qingshi's figure flashed and transformed into a ray of green light that vanished on the horizon. Su Qingshi had just left when Taoist Zui suddenly appeared where Su Qingshi stood just moments ago. A wisp of regret flashed in Taoist Zui's eyes as he gazed at Yan Yi, and then he said, "Kid, I'll be frank because it's pointless to say anything now. I came looking for you because I hope you'll return the Azure Sword to the Sword Sect." Yan Yi laughed with self-ridicule and said, "Senior, do I even have the qualifications to refuse in front of you?" As soon as he finished speaking, the Azure Sword appeared in his hand. Right at this moment, it suddenly shook before it transformed into its sword spirit. The little girl glanced at Taoist Zui before she said, "Geezer, I want to go with him." Her tone was indisputable. Taoist Zui shook his head and said, "Going with him will only harm him. A First Heaven Realm profounder possessing a Tao artifact. At that time, it would just be the Flower Palace and Origin School that go after him. He's utterly unable to take control of you with his current strength. Moreover, every single time he forcefully utilizes you will harm his meridians, and he'll be crippled after a few more times. Geezer, those are all excuses." The little girl stared at Taoist Zui with a hostile gaze and said, "Don't think that you can deceive me just because I'm a sword spirit. At the bottom of it all, you just don't want a Tao artifact of the Sword Sect to fall into the hands of an outsider, right?" Taoist Zui shook his head and didn't speak further. With a wave of his right hand, the Azure Sword instantly transformed into its form as a sword before he forcefully put it away in his spatial ring. After that, he glanced at Yan Yi, and he seemed to want to say something yet didn't speak in the end. He just flashed and vanished on the spot. Yan Yi took a deep breath when he saw Taoist Zui leave, and a cold glow flashed in his eyes. Even though Yan Yi had come to participate in the Ascension rankings for Su Qingshi and his mother's sakes, it was the Sword Sect that obtained all the benefits. However, once the Sword Sect obtained the benefits, it didn't just refuse to protect him from the Flower Palace, it even took the Azure Sword back. It was naturally impossible for Yan Yi to not feel infuriated. However, he knew that anger was pointless. What could he do if he was furious and displeased? His strength was too weak in the end. The Sword Sect, the Flower Palace, the Ghost Sect, the Origin School. Yan Yi laughed coldly. He intended to repay all of them for everything they'd done to him. As it was said, what goes around comes around. After he left the square outside the Imperial Palace, Yan Yi headed to the Talisman Masters Association. Had never had any resentment towards the Talisman Masters Association and his master, Lin Shan. Because since the very beginning, if it wasn't for his master, Lin Shan, then he, Yan Yi, would have probably died at the hands of the Flower Palace a very long time ago. Especially Little Yao. If he didn't have Lin Shan, then Little Yao would probably be unable to grow up in a good environment like she was right now. Even though the Talisman Masters Association had abandoned him because of the pressure it suffered from the Dark Beast Empire, it had never betrayed him. Conversely, had obtained plenty of benefits from it but had never done anything for the association or his master. Yang Yi wasn't a selfish person, so he still took Lin Shan as his master. In the room, Lin Shan gazed at Yang Yi as he said, "Do you resent me?" Yang Yi shook his head. He stretched out his hand to rub little Yao's head as he said, "I did, a little, at the very beginning. However, I don't anymore. Since the beginning, Master and the Talisman Masters Association have done a great deal for me." Lin Shan gazed at Yang Yi for a short while, and when he noticed that Yang Yi didn't seem to be faking it, he sighed lightly and said, "The Talisman Masters Association is a collective. Everyone is extremely united at most times. However, this is only limited to instances when outsiders intend to bring harm to the interests of the entire association. All of us really look favorably upon your natural talent. However, you, your martial uncle Bai Shan, and I aren't able to represent the entire association. If the interests of those old fellows are harmed, then the entire association would probably fall into internal strife. This is exactly the reason why your martial uncle and I didn't stop you from leaving the association." Yang Yi smiled and said, "I understand. I came to the association this time because there's something I want to ask of Master." Lin Shan glanced at little Yao and said, "Is it Yao?" Yang Yi nodded. "Don't worry, no one can harm her with me by her side," Lin Shan guaranteed. Yang Yi bowed to Lin Shan when he heard this because this was exactly what he wanted to hear. Chapter 269 Profounder Continent? After accompanying little Yao and Bauer for a few days, Yang Yi started to gather the spirit herbs that Elder Mu asked him to gather. With Lin Shan's help, had gathered all the materials without encountering any difficulty. After he finished gathering the spirit herbs and medicinal herbs, Yang Yi bid his farewells to Lin Shan and headed below Death Abyss. Even though Yang Yi had won in the battle with Yuan Tong, it allowed him to realize his insufficiencies. After all, if he hadn't utilized the tiny vortex and the Tao artifact, and if he had merely relied on his own combat instinct and sword techniques, then the outcome of the battle was unpredictable. Moreover, according to the founding emperor, the youths from the devil race that he would encounter at the ancient battlefield were much more monstrous geniuses than Yuan Tong. So, he had to improve his strength as soon as possible. Especially his physical body. If he hadn't relied on his extremely formidable physical body during the battle with Yuan Tong, then he would absolutely not dare to fight Yuan Tong in close-quartered combat. Because Yuan Tong's combat instinct was truly terrifying. Especially when Yuan Tong had comprehended both battle intent and fist intent. Under such circumstances, an ordinary physical body would be utterly unable to endure a single punch from Yuan Tong. In short, he had numerous insufficiencies. So, had headed to the Death Abyss to look for Elder Mu again. Even though he didn't know what this mysterious old man wanted him to do in the future, Elder Mu was the only one who could help him now. So, he had no other choice. Outside Elder Mu's cottage, Elder Mu supported himself with the walking stick. He gazed at Yang Yi and grinned before he said, "You obtained the first position on the Ascension rankings? It was only luck." Yang Yi nodded, and then he described the battle between him and Yuan Tong. After a short while, Elder Mu nodded lightly and said, "You really were lucky. Even though Yuan Tong was said to be the quasi-martial emperor, he hadn't comprehended the heart of the strong. If had comprehended it, then you would probably be unable to defeat him even if you utilized that Tao artifact. Haha. The martial god. After such an existence that could become the martial god finally appeared in the Southern Territory, he was destroyed at your hands." Yang Yi shook his head and didn't say anything. No matter if it was the martial god or the sword emperor, he wasn't interested at all. Since the very beginning, he only had a single objective, and that was to rescue his mother from the Flower Palace. Elder Mu suddenly asked, "If I'm not wrong, then you're probably heading to the ancient battlefield next?" Yang Yi was stunned, and then he said, "How did you know, Elder Mu?" Elder Mu smiled lightly, and then he revealed a serious expression and said, "The ancient battlefield is said to be the grave of geniuses. No matter how much of a genius one was, it's possible to be buried there. Because there's never a lack of monstrous geniuses there. At that place, there's no one that's the most monstrous genius because there's always an even more monstrous genius. Right, even if you've attained the enlightened sword heart, an initial stage of sword intent, you can only be considered as average there." "The members of the devil race are really so terrifying?" asked Yang Yi with a low voice. Elder Mu shook his head, and then he raised his head to look up into the sky as he said slowly, "Looks like you don't have a good understanding of the ancient battlefield. The reason it's called the ancient battlefield isn't merely because it's the battlefield of the humans and dark beasts against the devil race." When he spoke up to here, Elder Mu suddenly turned to look at Yan Yi before he said, "Do you know how large this continent is?" Yan Yi was stunned, and then he shook his head. What a joke! How could he possibly know how large the continent was? The furthest had been was only the Grand Myriad Mountains. Elder Mu spoke slowly. During the ancient times, this continent was called Profounder Continent. One day, a precious treasure suddenly appeared on Profounder Continent, and this treasure was called the Boundless Sea of Energy. For the sake of seizing this precious treasure, two top experts of Profounder Continent engaged each other in battle. Both of them were the supreme experts of that time, and any one of them could shatter a star with a single strike of the palm. After 100 years of fighting, their battle had caused Profounder Continent to shatter apart into 9 territories. They shattered an entire continent. Such strength! Yan Yi suppressed the shock in his heart, and then he asked, "Elder Mu, what you mean is that our southern territory is one of those 9 territories?" Elder Mu nodded and said, "The extreme north, that is the other side of the Heaven Tower mountain range, is actually another territory, and it's called the Devil Territory. Since it used to be a single continent, then why has no one from the other territories come to the southern territory?" asked Yang Yi. Elder Mu sighed and said, "Because every single territory was sealed off by the supreme strength of an expert. For example, the reason the Heaven Tower mountain range is able to obstruct the devil race isn't that it's impossible to scale, and it's instead because that expert seal resides there. Then why are the youths of the devil race able to climb over the mountain range and arrive at the southern territory?" asked Yang Yi. Elder Mu chuckled and said, "There are always people of exceptional ability emerging throughout the generations. Even though he was extremely formidable, that expert has perished in the end. On the other hand, even though the strength of the devil race's devil exalt is inferior to that expert, the gap between them isn't huge. So, he has been weakening the seal on Heaven Tower mountain range, and that's why countless youths from the devil race can come to the southern territory from the devil territory. What Elder Mu means that it isn't just the devil region, and the seal on the various other regions sealed by that experts has started to weaken as well. In other words, it wouldn't just be the youths from the devil race that will be making an appearance at the ancient battlefield, and the extraordinary geniuses of the other territories will be there as well?" asked Yang Yi in a low voice. A wisp of praise flashed in Elder Mu's eyes, and then he nodded lightly. Yan Yi's heart sank when he heard this because the founding emperor hadn't told him that the experts of the other territories would be appearing at the ancient battlefield. Did he do it unintentionally or intentionally? If it was intentional, then what was his intention? Elder Mu suddenly said, "Actually, I don't approve of you going to the ancient battlefield. Because you're merely at the first heaven realm now, so your cultivation is too low. It's unrealistic for you to think of surmounting realms of cultivation to do battle there. After all, those who are able to appear on the ancient battlefield are monstrous geniuses amongst monstrous geniuses. Even though you're a monstrous genius as well, as I've said before, your cultivation is a bit too low." When he spoke up to here, Elder Mu suddenly changed the topic and said, "However, that place is an opportunity for you to become stronger as well. Because fighting the experts from the other territories is very beneficial to you. Moreover, there's a treasure there that you must obtain in order to temper your body into a state that's stronger than the physical bodies of dark beasts and the devil race." "What treasure?" asked Yang Yi. Elder Mu smiled, and then he opened his right hand. A flame instantly appeared on his palm, and then he said, "There are some precious treasures in the world, and these precious treasures form a spirit of their own after experiencing the baptism of countless years. Just like this nether ghost flames of mine. Even though it seemed like a mere strand of flames, it actually has its own intelligence." When he spoke up to here, Elder Mu flicked his finger, and the ghastly white-colored nether ghost flame suddenly attached itself onto Yan Yi's hidden sword. Yan Yi was stunned when he saw the hidden sword being completely enveloped by the nether ghost flames. He didn't know what Elder Mu was trying to show him, so he raised his head to look at Elder Mu. Elder Mu grinned and said, "Try waving your sword now." When he heard this, Yan Yi hesitated briefly before he drew his sword and slashed. In an instant, a strand of sword chi shot out explosively from the hidden sword. However, it was unlike the past, because the nether ghost flames was actually attached to the sword chi. In other words, this strand of sword chi Yan Yi executed was one that carried fire. This was extremely shocking. Bang! An enormous tree over 30 m away was instantly blasted apart by that strand of sword chi. However, the following scene stunned Yan Yi on the spot. Because the tree that exploded apart had actually mysteriously transformed into nothingness, as if it had never existed there. When has my sword chi become so formidable? Even 4th level sword intent is unable to accomplish that. Yan Yi was stunned, and then he gazed at Elder Mu and said, "It's because of the nether ghost flames?" Elder Mu nodded and said, "The nether ghost flames hasn't been subdued by you, so its true might is far from just that. If you subdue it, then not only will it temper your body all day and night, you can even utilize it just like how I attached it to your sword chi just now. Moreover, not only can it be attached to your sword chi, it can even be attached to your sword. So, if your opponent's dark treasure isn't of sufficient quality, then it would probably be incinerated into nothingness by the nether ghost flames before it can even approach your sword." Yan Yi gulped down a mouthful of saliva, and then he said, "Elder Mu, you mean that you intend to give the nether ghost flames to me?" Elder Mu nodded. Yan Yi took a deep breath, and then he suppressed the excitement in his heart, and said with a puzzled tone, "Why? There was no free food in the world. Moreover, Elder Mu and Yan Yi were neither related nor friends. Even though they were like master and disciple by way of the guidance Elder Mu had provided him, they weren't actual master and disciple. So, why would Elder Mu give him such a precious treasure of the heavens and the earth? Yan Yi didn't possess such great charism to warrant this. Elder Mu glanced at Yan Yi before he sighed lightly, and then he said, "Your current strength is too weak, and I don't have much time left. So, you have to improve your strength as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you'll be utterly unable to accomplish what I want you to do." "You don't have much time?" Yan Yi frowned and said, "Elder Mu, what do you mean?" Elder Mu shook his head and said, "You'll find out about all of that in the future. In short, you must improve your strength as quickly as possible. Not only for the sake of your mother but for your own sake as well. Because the Southern Territory is about to fall into disorder. Don't ask me what I mean. You'll naturally understand when the time comes." Yan Yi shook his head helplessly when he heard this. Is Elder Mu trying to arouse my curiosity on purpose? With his strength, can anyone even harm him? Moreover, what did he mean when he said the Southern Territory is about to fall into disorder? Yan Yi shook his head, stopped thinking about it, and then he asked, "Elder Mu, you said there's a treasure I need in the ancient battlefield. What is it? How should I search for it?" After he witnessed the terrifying might of the nether ghost flames, Yan Yi grew even more curious towards that treasure that Elder Mu had spoken about. "Don't be impatient." Elder Mu smiled, and then he walked slowly towards the bath barrel. After that, he flipped his palm, and the nether ghost flames instantly entered the bath barrel. In an instant, the water within the barrel started burning. At the same time, the temperature in the surroundings instantly rose, and it was to the point that Yan Yi was able to clearly sense the terrifying temperature within the bath barrel even if he was over 10 m away from it. Elder Mu turned to look at Yan Yi before he said, "Go on in." Yan Yi's expression instantly became unsightly when he heard this. Chapter 270 Courting Death. Even though it wasn't his first time, Yan Yi was able to sense that the temperature within the bath barrel couldn't be compared to the past at all. Your physical body has arrived at a certain level, so it's utterly impossible to improve it effectively with just the medicinal herbs that you gathered. Only by greatly stimulating your body with the nether ghost flames and supplementing it with the medicinal herbs would your physical body be able to obtain an obvious increase. Moreover, if you want to subdue the nether ghost flames, then the first step is to endure its heat, said Elder Mu. Yan Yi smiled bitterly. No wonder there are practically no body refiners in the entire Southern Territory now. There are probably very few people in the world that are able to endure the process of body refinement. Yan Yi took a deep breath, stopped hesitating, and then jumped into the barrel. So long as he was able to improve his strength, then what was a little bit of pain? Bang! As soon as he entered it, the clothes Yan Yi wore had transformed into ash. At the same time, the skin throughout his body instantly turned crimson red as if it had been cooked. Moreover, his veins had started to bulge up all over his face and neck, causing his appearance to seem especially terrifying. Pain. Extreme pain. Pain that struck deep into the bones. This was what Yang Yi felt at this moment. Even though he was mentally prepared, he still couldn't help but almost be unable to restrain himself from leaping out from the bath barrel when he felt the terrifying temperature of the nether ghost flames. However, fortunately, he was able to endure it in the end. There was a price to pay if one wanted to become strong. Scarlet red blisters started to gradually appear on Yan Yi's skin, and the blisters were around the size of a thumb. These blisters densely covered his entire body. It could be said that Yan Yi's current appearance was something that could even terrify a demon. Elder Mu nodded lightly when he saw these blisters, and then he tossed the spirit herbs Yan Yi gathered into the bath barrel, causing some green dots to gradually appear within the water. Under Elder Mu's control, those green dots surged towards Yan Yi. The blisters on his body popped apart when these green dots came into contact with Yan Yi's skin. Pain. Pain that was even greater than before. Yan Yi almost let out a shrill cry. Fortunately, right at this moment, the golden profound energy within his body had started to flow slowly, and it flowed slowly through the meridians in his entire body. With the incessant recovery provided by the golden profound energy, Yan Yi instantly felt much better. Time passed slowly. 10 days later, Yan Yi had gotten completely accustomed to the temperature of the nether ghost flames. Of course, this temperature was its temperature while it was under Elder Mu's control, and if it was the nether ghost flame's true temperature, then not to mention Yan Yi's current physical body, even the physical body of an exalt rank dark beast would probably be instantly transformed into nothingness. Elder Mu, who stood by the bath barrel, suddenly gestured with his right hand, and the ghastly white ocean of flames within the bath barrel had instantly converged into a small clump of flames that appeared on his palm. A wisp of a complicated expression flashed in Elder Mu's eyes as he gazed at the tiny clump of flames on his palm. He said, "I obtained this nether ghost flame by chance at the ghost territory. I originally had no intention to subdue it because while it possessed intelligence of its own, it was merely at a juvenile stage. Nether ghost flame at the juvenile stage is truly useless to me. But it was too much of a waste to just leave it there. However, I never expected that it would still be at the juvenile stage after being by my side for over 1,000 years. Now, you're going to benefit from it instead," Yang Yi said with astonishment when he heard this. "Elder Mu, this nether ghost flame is merely at the juvenile stage?" Elder Mu nodded and said, "It was already matured, then I wouldn't give it to you. Of course, if it has already matured, then it would be utterly impossible to subdue it with your strength. Alright, you've gotten used to its temperature, so open your mouth and allow it to enter your dantian." "Enter my dantian?" Yan Yi was shocked and said, "Elder Mu, even though my body has gotten used to its temperature, the insides of my body are still comparatively weaker. If I allow it to enter my body, then I would probably be instantly incinerated into nothingness. The treasures of the heavens and the earth contain terrifying energy within them, and just approaching them would be life-threatening to ordinary people. On the other hand, subduing them is extremely dangerous. Even though it's dangerous, if you're able to subdue it, then the assistance it provides you wouldn't be inferior to your sword intent at all. Of course, if you're afraid of danger, then just forget it. Elder Mu spoke indifferently. Yang Yi smiled bitterly, and then he said, Elder Mu, let's begin. As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi had opened his mouth. Elder Mu nodded lightly, and then he flicked his finger, causing the flame on his palm to instantly fly into Yang Yi's throat. At the moment this happened, Yang Yi's expression immediately became colorful. One would definitely understand how Yang Yi felt right now if one had tried to drink boiling water. No matter what, the pain from the outside of the body was impossible to be compared to the pain that came from within the body. Because all the organs and structures within the body were extremely weak and fragile. So, at this moment, Yang Yi's expression had started to warp from the pain he experienced. After the tongue of flames had entered Yang Yi's body, it seemed like a playful child that played over here for a moment, and stopped over there for a while. Everywhere it passed was completely scorched black. However, fortunately, the golden profound energy within him was ceaselessly repairing his body, otherwise, Yang Yi would have probably taken his last breath by now. In next to no time, it had arrived at Yang Yi's dantian. Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief and was just about to utilize the method Elder Mu taught him to take control of the nether ghost flame when it suddenly transformed into a fiery ray of light that entered the tiny vortex. Yang Yi was stunned. After it entered the tiny vortex, it once again acted as it had when it had just arrived within Yang Yi's body. It became a curious child that moved about all over the place. Suddenly it seemed to have noticed something, and then it moved towards the outside of the tiny vortex. However, right at this moment, it suddenly froze stiff on the spot as if an invisible force had trapped it. The little tongue of flames slowly started to tremble, while it grew dimmed as well. It seemed as if it would be extinguished at any moment. Moreover, it slowly started trembling even more intensely as if it had encountered something extremely terrifying. Suddenly, the invisible force vanished. However, even though it had vanished, the tongue of flames was still unable to leave the tiny vortex. After the invisible force vanished, the little tongue of flames floated about on the spot, and then it felt that it was safe and started moving slowly towards the pool of profound energy. It seemed to be very interested in the violet mink, and it floated about around the violet-colored barrier of light that enveloped the violet mink. Right when it was about to come into contact with the violet barrier of light that enveloped the violet mink, the invisible force appeared once more. After a short while, the little tongue of flames had moved away from the little fellow. On the other hand, the king-rank dark beasts within Yang Yi's vortex dantian had astounded expressions as they gazed at the tongue of flames. All of these king-rank dark beasts felt both curious and fearful towards this newcomer because their intuition told them that this tongue of flames was extremely dangerous. As he watched the actions of the tongue of flames in the space within the tiny vortex, Yang Yi was slightly amused. Now, he believed that the tongue of flames was at the juvenile stage. He stopped hesitating and started to subdue it according to the method provided by Elder Mu. The tongue of flames was naturally unwilling to allow itself to be subdued, and it resisted Yang Yi. It started to move about incessantly within the tiny vortex. In the end, it transformed into an ocean of flames. However, as soon as it became an ocean of flames, the invisible force had appeared once more. This time, it wasn't just the little tongue of flames, even the other king-rank dark beasts that were able to sense the invisible force. At the instant that they sensed the invisible force, all the king-rank dark beasts, and the nether ghost flame that had transformed into an ocean of flames had started to tremble. It was a mysterious force that caused even their souls to tremble. All the dark beasts started howling towards the nether ghost flame as if they were complaining that I had infuriated the mysterious force. On the other hand, the nether ghost flame seemed to be aware that it had made a huge mistake, and it hurriedly transformed back into its previous state. When Yang Yi witnessed this scene, he hurriedly started to subdue it. This time, even though the little tongue of flames had still tried to struggle, it was clearly not as intense as before. After around an hour of time, Yang Yi opened his eyes, and he revealed an undisguised expression of pleasant surprise. "You succeeded?" Elder Mu asked in a light voice. Yang Yi nodded with a smile on his face. With a flick of his finger, a strand of ghastly white flames appeared on the tip of his finger. As he gazed at the strand of flames, Yang Yi felt very fortunate in his heart. If the tongue of flame hadn't gone into the tiny vortex by itself, if it hadn't gone to disturb the violet mink, if it hadn't acted wildly in the tiny vortex, if the tiny vortex hadn't become infuriated. In short, if the tongue of flames hadn't courted death, then Yang Yi would probably have to suffer a great deal in order to subdue this wild and unyielding nether ghost flame. It was even to the extent that subduing it successfully might even become a problem. A wisp of surprise flashed in Elder Mu's eyes when he saw the little tongue of flames on the tip of Yang Yi's finger. He knew exactly how terrifying the nether ghost flame was. In his opinion, Yang Yi would at least require half a month in order to subdue the nether ghost flame. However, to his surprise, Yang Yi hadn't even used 2 hours to subdue it. Elder Mu glanced deeply at Yang Yi, and then he said, "Now that you've subdued the nether ghost flames, I'll use the remaining time to teach you how to utilize it. Right, it's best that you don't rashly expose the nether ghost flame in public. After all, it's extraordinarily attractive and tempting even to spirit realm and exalt realm experts. Be sure to always remember that." Yang Yi nodded. The nether ghost flame was a precious treasure of the heavens and the earth. Coupled with the terrifying ability and might it possessed, it would be impossible for those extraordinary experts to not desire it. "Now, try controlling the nether ghost flames," said Elder Mu. Yang Yi grinned because Head wanted to test his might for some time now. Earlier, it was Elder Mu controlling the nether ghost flames and attaching it to the hidden sword, yet now, it would be he who had to control the nether ghost flames. The significance of these two events was completely different. Chapter 271 Meeting in Xian'er again. With a flick of his finger, a strand of white flames appeared in front of Yang Yi. As he gazed at the little tongue of flames that was only the size of his thumb, Yang Yi had a solemn expression. Based on its outward appearance, the tongue of flames seemed to be like an ordinary tongue of flames, and besides its ghastly white-colored appearance, it didn't look different at all. Yang Yi took a deep breath, stopped hesitating, and flicked his finger. A strand of golden sword chi that was enhanced by his 4th-level sword intent shot out explosively from the tip of his finger. At the moment this strand of golden sword chi appeared, the nether ghost flame in front of Yang Yi transformed into a fiery glow that attached itself onto the strand of golden sword chi. With 4th-level sword intent and the nether ghost flame surrounding it, that strand of golden sword chi instantly became terrifying. Everywhere it passed, space seemed to have been burnt, causing a very long white mark to appear in space. Under Yang Yi's gaze that was filled with excitement and anticipation, this strand of golden sword chi collided with a tree in the distance that was wide to the point it required around 10 people to hug completely. Bang! Along with a resounding explosion. The enormous tree was blasted into pieces before Yang Yi's astounded gaze, and then it suddenly started burning just like the tree from before. In less than an instant, that enormous tree had transformed into a pile of black ash that scattered all over the ground. However, the golden strand of sword chi hadn't vanished, and it was shooting explosively towards the distance without losing momentum at all. Bang! Numerous explosions resounded once more. However, to Yang Yi's shock, the sword chi hadn't vanished after successively burning over 10 trees into ash. After all, he was already over 300 m away from that strand of sword chi. In the past, because of the profound energy he possessed, the golden sword chi he executed were able to exist for a certain period of time after Head executed the attack. Moreover, with the enhancement of his sword intent, his sword chi was able to travel a distance of over 120 m away from him. This was his limit. Yet now, the sword chi hadn't dispersed after traveling over 300 m away from him. Moreover, it was under the circumstances that it had already blasted apart and incinerated more than 10 trees. Is the nether ghost flame really so terrifying? A mountain wall resided over 300 m away, and that strand of sword chi directly pierced into the wall. After a moment of silence, an enormous bang resounded before the mountain wall was suddenly blasted apart. In a few breaths of time, A pitch-black and bottomless hole that was around 15 m in both width and height had appeared on the mountain wall. Yan Yi gulped down a mouthful of saliva as he gazed at the pitch-black hole. The might of sword intent combined with the nether ghost flame is truly terrifying. Just that strike alone would have been more than enough to instantly annihilate some experts at the King Realm. Right at this moment, a ray of fiery light suddenly shot out from the mountain wall, and then it flashed and arrived in front of Yan Yi. Yan Yi took another deep breath as he gazed at the ghastly white tongue of flame before him. It really does deserve to be a precious treasure of the heavens and the earth. Such might is truly too terrifying. After he kept the nether ghost flame within the tiny vortex, Yan Yi bowed to Elder Mu and said, "Elder Mu, I'm truly unable to repay such kindness. If you need me in the future, then feel free to provide me with your instructions. So long as I, Yan Yi, am capable of it, I definitely won't refuse." Even though he didn't know what this mysterious old man wanted him to do in the future, he didn't mind so long as it didn't go against his principles, and he was resolved to accomplish the task that the old man entrusted to him in the future. It could be said that Yan Yi wouldn't be able to possess his current accomplishments without this old man. Just like it was said before, even though they weren't master and disciple in name, they were like master and disciple through the relationship they possessed. Or perhaps, it could be said that in Yan Yi's heart, had taken this old man to be his master. Elder Mu grinned and said, "You'll remember what you said. I hope that you'll think in the same way when the time comes. Alright, let's not talk about that for now. Your physical body has already arrived at a certain level now, and if you want to accomplish another qualitative improvement, then you must find the treasure of the heavens and the earth that I spoke of. There's a place called the Cold Wind Tunnel at the ancient battlefield, and that treasure resides in the deepest depths of the Cold Wind Tunnel. It's called the Ninth Hell Cold Gale. Of course, the precondition is that no experts have noticed the Ninth Hell Cold Gale." "The Ninth Hell Cold Gale?" Yan Yi was puzzled. "Elder Mu, what's that?" "The Ninth Hell Cold Gale leaves no traces. It's born in the Ninth Hell, and it can only gain intelligence after existing for a few thousands of years. All those years ago, it hadn't formed intelligence of its own when I was at the Cold Wind Tunnel. It was still in a chaotic state, so I hadn't taken it. Now that 1,000 years have passed, I presume that it has probably formed its intelligence. So you can try your luck," said Elder Mu. Yan Yi nodded. After he witnessed how formidable the nether ghost flame was, he was extremely interested in the Ninth Hell Cold Gale that Elder Mu spoke about. Since it was a treasure of the heavens and the earth just like the nether ghost flame, then its might was definitely indisputable. If he was able to suddenly utilize both of these treasures of the heavens and the earth in battle, then it would definitely give his opponent an extremely huge pleasant surprise. When he saw the expression Yang Yi revealed, Elder Mu knew what Yang Yi was thinking, and he immediately shook his head and said, "Could it be that you think that the Ninth Hell Cold Gale is yours already?" Yang Yi scratched his head with embarrassment when he heard this, and then he said, "Elder Mu, is the Ninth Hell Cold Gale even more terrifying than the nether ghost flame?" "Not at all," Elder Mu said. "But you have to understand that the nether ghost flame was already subdued and tamed by me before I gave it to you. On the other hand, you have to head to the Cold Wind Tunnel to obtain the Ninth Hell Cold Gale yourself. The difference between these two situations is extremely huge. After all, the nether ghost flame was within the boundless ocean of flames in the ghost territory. With your current strength, not to mention heading into the depths of the ocean of flames, even approaching the ocean of flames would probably be impossible for you. On the other hand, the Cold Wind Tunnel where the Ninth Hell Cold Gale resides is filled with boundless cold winds and een attribute wind. It's even greater than the boundless ocean of flames." Yan Yi's expression froze when he heard this, and then he said, "Elder Mu, then aren't you asking me to give my life away by asking me to search for the Ninth Hell Cold Gale?" Elder Mu said, "If it was a few days ago, then you would really be courting death if you went to look for the Ninth Hell Cold Gale. But now, with the physical body and the 4th level sword intent you possess, you may have a chance at resisting the endless een attribute and cold winds in the Cold Wind Tunnel. Especially your current physical body, it should be able to resist the cold winds there. but you'll probably have to suffer a little. Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief. It's fine so long as I have a chance. All he was afraid of was having no chance at all. As for some pain, had he not suffered a great deal already? Besides that, you must remember not to underestimate your enemies at the ancient battlefield. You really are practically invincible amongst the younger generation of the Southern Territory. However, the geniuses amongst geniuses gather at the ancient battlefield. When compared with the Southern Territory, no matter if it was cultivation techniques or inheritances, the other territories are much more superior to the Southern Territory, said Elder Mu. Yang Yi nodded and said, Elder Mu, don't worry. I won't underestimate any opponent. However, after I heard Elder Mu speak like that, I really want to see these monstrous geniuses of the other territories. Elder Mu grinned and said, Perhaps you're still unaware, but the overall strength of the Southern Territory is the weakest amongst all the territories. Besides, the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect had swept through the ancient battlefield by himself and crushed the geniuses from all the territories. There hadn't been another person from the Southern Territory that has been capable of that for the last 10,000 years. You must understand that he crushed them to the point that all the young monstrous geniuses of the other territories had submitted before him. Yang Yi suddenly said, Elder Mu, are you or the Sword Sect's founding ancestor stronger? Elder Mu slowly restrained his smile when he heard this. After a short while, he shook his head and said with a smile on his face, Kid, you're actually trying to compare me with him? When he spoke up to hear, Elder Mu suddenly sighed and said, There's probably no one in the Southern Territory who can compare to him. I can't as well. After all, he relied on the sword in his hand to completely crush the path of ascension that instills fear in countless extraordinary experts. The path of ascension? Yang Yi frowned and said, Elder Mu, what's that? Elder Mu shook his head and said, If you don't die prematurely, then you might be able to see that path in the future. Alright, it'll be time for you to head to the ancient battlefield in a few days. So go on. Don't die prematurely. As soon as he finished speaking, Elder Mu didn't speak another word. With a wave of his right hand, a blue teleportation circle appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then he turned around and walked slowly into the cottage. Yang Yi smiled bitterly as he gazed at the tightly shut door of the cottage. Elder Mu really is very mysterious, just like my tiny vortex. With Elder Mu's strength, he should be renowned throughout the Southern Territory. However, for some unknown reason, Elder Mu's name doesn't exist in the entire Southern Territory. Moreover, why would Elder Mu be living in seclusion at the bottom of Death Abyss? Yang Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about this. Presently, his most important objective was to improve his strength as soon as possible, and then find a way to rescue his mother. As for everything else, he truly shouldn't waste time and energy to give it unnecessary concern. In any case, everything would fall into place in the end. Yang Yi bowed respectfully towards the cottage, and then he didn't stay here anymore and stepped into the blue circle. Right when Yang Yi vanished in the blue circle, the door to the cottage opened slowly before Elder Mu walked out from within the cottage. He gazed towards the Grand Qin Empire while fluctuations surged in his eyes, and he seemed to have thought of something. After a short while, he sighed faintly and said, Sure enough, not everything can be deduced. The Heaven Tao really does vary. After he returned to the Grand Qin Empire, Yang Yi obtained the information related to the ancient battlefield that Qin Xia had sent over. However, the information didn't mention anything about the other territories, causing Yang Yi to fall silent as he looked through the information. Why would the Empire and the 6 great powers conceal the information about the other territories? Right at this moment, a strand of white light flashed by, and then a graceful figure suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi and interrupted his deep thought. Ho ho! Little Yi, what are you thinking so seriously about? Could it be that you miss me? We were merely apart for around a month, so there's no need to miss me like that. A soft and charming voice suddenly resounded by Yang Yi's ear, and it caused Yang Yi to instantly feel slightly restless. It was none other than Yin Xian'er, who he hadn't seen for over a month. Chapter 272 Karmic Luck. After being apart for over a month, Enchantment was still so graceful and enchanting. Especially when she revealed her charm on purpose. Coupled with her peerless appearance and hot figure, even Yang Yi couldn't help but start breathing rapidly. Yang Yi took a deep breath, and with a command in his heart, his sword intent was released from within him, allowing Yang Yi's mind to instantly clear up. As he gazed at the stunner standing before him, he spoke indifferently. Miss Yin really knows how to choose the best time to make an appearance. In the past, he didn't understand why this woman had left before he went to participate in the Ascension rankings, but he had a vague understanding now. If he wasn't wrong, then Shed probably expected that his life would be in danger. Enchantment didn't become infuriated by Yang Yi's ridicule, and she smiled in a charming manner and said, "You've misjudged me this time. I didn't leave for the reasons you're thinking of, and I left for your own good." "Is that so?" Yang Yi said indifferently. "So I should thank you?" Enchantment smiled and said, "Of course. You should understand that if they noticed that I was with you, then no matter how monstrous your natural talent is or how terrifying your potential is, you'll definitely die. Not to mention protecting you, the founding emperor of the Grand Qin Empire would probably be the first to make a move to kill you. So, the relationship between us can't be exposed at all, otherwise, the entire southern territory would probably not tolerate your existence." Yang Yi fell silent when he heard this. Because this woman's words did make sense. However, he would naturally not believe that this woman would be so kind as to be thoughtful and considerate towards him. Had never had a good impression of this woman, and he even had a strong feeling of vigilance towards her. Because his intuition told him that this woman was definitely a dangerous person. Enchantment suddenly asked, "Will you be heading to the ancient battlefield?" Yang Yi was surprised and said, "How did you know?" When she heard Yang Yi, Enchantment restrained her charming smile and laughed coldly. "The founding emperor really didn't have any good intentions." Yang Yi frowned and said, "What do you mean?" "Do you know what the ancient battlefield is?" asked Enchantment. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment before he nodded and said, "Isn't it just the place where the geniuses of all the territories are gathering?" A wisp of surprise flashed in Enchantment's eyes when she heard this, and then she said, "I never expected that you would actually be aware of that. It wasn't the founding emperor that told you all of this, right?" Yang Yi nodded and then he said, "How did you know that it wasn't the founding emperor?" Yang Yi felt that there was something off here. Enchantment sighed and said, "You're aware that the ancient battlefield is the place where the young geniuses of all the territories gather, but do you know why they gathered at the southern territory?" To be more precise, do you know the objectives they came to the southern territory with?" Yang Yi shook his head because Elder Mu hadn't told him about that. "There's an imperceptible and unreal thing on profounder continent called karmic luck. It can't be seen, touched, or felt. However, it really does exist," Enchantment said. "There's a place called the Hidden Dragon Pagoda at the ancient battlefield. Because those that are able to enter the pagoda are all the extraordinarily monstrous geniuses of the various territories, the Hidden Dragon Pagoda is also called the Monstrous Genius Pagoda. The Monstrous Genius Pagoda is their objective." Yang Yi gazed at Enchantment to display that she should continue. "The reason the monstrous geniuses of these other territories travel to the ancient battlefield to ascend the Monstrous Genius Pagoda is that there's a top-grade dragon vein beneath the pagoda. Cultivating in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda for a day is equivalent to cultivating for a year in the outside world. Especially at the highest level of the pagoda, the 5th level. A single day of cultivation there is equivalent to 5 years of time. Of course, most importantly, the dragon vein can provide karmic luck to the person cultivating there, and the power that person represents," said Enchantment. "You're saying that the founding emperor wants me to represent the Grand Qin Empire, and ascend the Hidden Dragon Pagoda in order to increase the karmic luck of the Grand Qin Empire?" Yang Yi said in a low voice. "But why didn't he tell me directly?" Enchantment rolled her eyes at him and said, "If he told you how terrifying the ancient battlefield and Hidden Dragon Pagoda were, you probably wouldn't go there. Don't ever think that you're very formidable because you've comprehended 4th level sword intent and the enlightened sword intent. To be frank, with your current strength, you probably wouldn't even be able to ascend the third level of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Yang Yi shook his head and disregarded her words before he said, "What's the karmic luck that you spoke of?" When he spoke about karmic luck, Yin Xian's expression became serious, and she said, "It's an unreal and imperceptible thing, but it's undeniable that it really does exist. Do you know why my Shang dynasty was destroyed? Or do you know why the sword sect has fallen into decline yet still exists?" Yang Yi shook his head and asked, "It's related to karmic luck?" He didn't believe this sort of thing. If a person doesn't work hard, then could it be that one could become an expert by relying solely on this thing called karmic luck? Yin Xian sighed and said, "Don't doubt it. Karmic luck really exists. Otherwise, the extraordinary experts of the other territories wouldn't pay hefty prices in order to make a path through the barriers between the territories, and then allow the youths of their territories to travel to the southern territory and fight for karmic luck in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Besides that, karmic luck is also the reason why the sword sect has been able to exist for 10,000 years and avoid destruction even when it has fallen into decline. After all, the sword sect's founding ancestors swept through all the extraordinarily monstrous geniuses of the other territories in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Even if it was those extraordinarily monstrous geniuses from the Central Territory that is said to be the most terrifying and possesses the most monstrous genius were completely and utterly convinced of their inferiority by the sword sect's founding ancestor. Yang Yi laughed bitterly when he heard this. Looks like the founding ancestor of the sword sect really was a peerless expert. Even when others mention him 10,000 years later, they still carried deep respect towards him. However, he would have probably never imagined that the sword sect would become the weakest amongst the 6 great powers 10,000 years later. You really shouldn't have agreed to head to the ancient battlefield. Yin Xian sighed and said, "The lowest cultivation possessed by the young geniuses there is the King Realm. You're merely at the 7th rank of the First Heaven Realm now, so you're greatly inferior to them in terms of your cultivation. After all, even though the gap between the King Realm and the First Heaven Realm isn't like the gap between the heavens and the earth, it's still extremely huge. Especially when its King Realm profounders whore monstrous geniuses. Everyone really doesn't look favorably upon me." Yang Yi smiled, and then he suddenly asked, "You said that karmic luck is very important to these sects and powers?" "It's extremely important." Yin Xian nodded and said, "You've probably heard of the final objective behind the ascension rankings held by the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers. Actually, it was all done for the sake of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda at the ancient battlefield. They seek to select profounders with strength and potential, and then send these profounders to the ancient battlefield to represent them to fight for the karmic luck in Hidden Dragon Pagoda. You said that I would be courting death by heading there. Then if those fellows who couldn't even defeat me were to head to the ancient battlefield, then wouldn't they even lack the qualifications to court death? Since it's like that, then why do they still intend to send those profounders to the ancient battlefield?" said Yang Yi. "You couldn't be thinking that those disciples who participated in the ascension rankings were the most outstanding disciples of the various powers, right?" asked Yin Xian. "Could it be that they weren't?" Yang Yi frowned and said, "Don't tell me that the Origin School has someone that's an even more monstrous genius than Yuan Tong." "That's not the case." Yin Xian shook her head and said, "Yuan Tong's natural talent really can be considered to be that of an extraordinarily monstrous genius in the Southern Territory. With his strength, he shouldn't have participated in the ascension rankings. However, had participated in order to attain the title of Martial God and obtain the acknowledgement of that existence of Martial God Mountain. But never had he imagined. No, I should say that the entire Origin School had never imagined that a quasi-sword emperor would actually appear during a tiny competition like the Ascension Rankings. Moreover, that quasi-sword emperor would actually be able to incomprehensibly utilize a Dao artifact. Alas, the Origin School can be considered to have suffered a huge loss this time." Yang Yi shook his head, stopped discussing this matter, and said, "Miss Yin, you probably won't be following me to the ancient battlefield, right?" Yin Xian shook her head and said, "I came looking for you this time for the sake of getting the gold guards in that vortex of yours." "Right, in other words, we're going to part ways." When he heard this, Yang Yi hurriedly waved his hand, and the 12 gold guards appeared in front of Yin. After that, he said, Miss Yin, even though we didn't really get along, I still hope that you'll be safe. This she-devil was finally about to leave, and it was undoubtedly a piece of good news to him. As she watched Yang Yi's actions, Yin glanced resentfully at him and said, Are you really so anxious for me to leave? In any case, we can be considered to be friends now, right? Yang Yi either agreed or disagreed as he smiled and remained silent. He hadn't taken this woman to be a friend. What a joke! This woman was even more scheming than Qin Xie. Moreover, Shed had ill intent towards him since the beginning. Consider her as a friend? Yang Yi wasn't an idiot. Yin Xian'er sighed when she saw the expression on Yang Yi's face, and then she said, Just as you said, even though we didn't really get along with each other, I hope you'll be able to return alive from the ancient battlefield. When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment before she said, It's best if you don't return. If you have the chance, then head to the Central Territory. With the potential and natural talent you possess, there'll definitely be an extraordinary sect there that's willing to take you in. So long as an extraordinary sect of the Central Territory takes a liking to you, then you'll definitely skyrocket into the heavens. Is something about to happen in the Southern Territory? Asked Yang Yi in a low voice. Yin Xian'er's lips parted slightly, yet she shook her head and smiled in the end. She said, Forget about that. No matter what, just listen to my advice this time. I hope that we'll be able to meet again in the future. As soon as she finished speaking, Yin Xian'er waved her hand, and then she transformed into a strand of white light that vanished along with the 12 gold guards. Yang Yi's brows knit together tightly as he watched Yin Xian'er leave. What exactly is about to occur in the Southern Territory? Could it be that conflict is about to arise between the 6 great powers and the Grand Qin Empire? But it doesn't seem likely. After all, everyone is living harmoniously with each other, and there aren't any huge conflicts of interest between them. So, it's clearly impossible for them to go to war with each other. However, if the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers aren't about to go to war, then how would the Southern Territory fall into chaos? Who possesses such extraordinary ability to accomplish that? After a short while, Yang Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about all of this. These weren't things that he should be worrying about because it didn't matter to him whether the Southern Territory fell into chaos or not. Moreover, he felt that it was even better the more chaotic it became. After all, he really disliked all of these powers. End of Book 2. Chapter 273 Heading to the Ancient Battlefield. Book 3 The Ancient Battlefield 4 days later, the geniuses ranked in the top 30 positions of the Ascension rankings had suddenly vanished from the imperial capital. They'd naturally headed to the ancient battlefield. It wasn't just those profoundest ranked on the Ascension rankings. Various other elites and secret troops from the Grand Qin Empire and genius disciples from the 6 great powers had headed to the ancient battlefield as well. If the Ascension rankings was related to the rise and decline of the various powers in the short term, then the fight for karmic luck at the ancient battlefield was related to the rise and fall of the various powers in the long term. So, the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers. No, it should be said that the Southern Territory had dispatched all its elites, and it hadn't held back at all. Especially the sects in the Southern Territory. It wasn't inner court disciples that they dispatched this time, and it was the elite disciples of their sects who had attained the King Realm. There was an enormous teleportation formation on a mountain outside the imperial capital. At this moment, the figures of youths densely covered the area below the teleportation platform. Amongst these youths were independent cultivators, the disciples of the various clans, and the disciples of the sections. At this moment, their faces were covered in excitement and delight. Because the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers hadn't just given them countless cultivation resources this time, they were even provided guarantees that they would become elite disciples of their sects if they were able to ascend to the 2nd level of the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Elite disciples. This was something that they couldn't help but be tempted by. Especially those independent cultivators. Even though it wasn't a problem at all for the profounders standing here to join the six great powers, becoming an elite disciple of the six great powers wasn't realistic. On the other hand, the difference in the treatment received by elite disciples and the inner court disciples could be said to be like the gap between the heavens and the earth. So, countless profounders here, especially those independent cultivators, were extraordinarily excited and delighted. As for the dangers of the ancient battlefield that the Grand Qin Empire and the six great powers had told them about, they'd completely disregarded it. Most times, and especially when it was before enormous temptation, most people tended to forget the dangers they had to face. As for the disciples of the sects, when they found out that they would encounter the monstrous geniuses of the other territories at the ancient battlefield, all of them weren't fearful at all. Conversely, they were excited and elated. Most geniuses had a common characteristic, and it was pride. They didn't feel that they were inferior to others at all. On the teleportation platform, Li Si shook his head inwardly as he gazed at the crowd below the platform. How many of these youths would be able to return alive from the ancient battlefield? Everyone, I hope all of you'll be able to attain great results at the Hidden Dragon Pagoda in the ancient battlefield. I've already told all of you about the dangers there, so if you intend to regret your decision and withdraw yourself, then you can do so right now. Once you've headed there, then you'll have no chance to regret your decision, said Li Si. All the profoundest below shook their heads upon hearing this. What a joke! Cultivating in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda for a day was comparable to a year of cultivation, and they even received the promise of rewards from the Grand Qin Empire and the six great powers. So, only an idiot would give up such a great opportunity. Li Si nodded when he saw that no one intended to withdraw, and then he said, "Since all of you have no objections, then please enter the teleportation formation." However, no one in the crowd below had moved. The countless profounders shot their gazes towards the figures standing in the frontmost row. These figures belonged to the elite disciples of the Grand Qin Empire and the six great powers. Most of them were unfamiliar faces, but there were also some familiar faces like Yuan Tong, Ling Xinran, Wenling Yu, and Muro Niao. Right when everyone was silent, the Origin School's elite disciple stepped forward, swept everyone with his gaze, and then said, "In the past, the first position on the Ascension ranking has always belonged to my Origin School. This year, it was seized by an outer court disciple of the Sword Sect. I, Yuan Xiu, would really like to meet this young man called Yang Yi. I wonder who is Yang Yi? Why don't you step out from the crowd so that I can meet you?" When he heard Yuan Xiu, Yuan Tong's expression instantly turned slightly unsightly. However, he didn't flare up. After he lost his qualifications to become the Martial God, it meant that he was unable to obtain the inheritance on Martial God Mountain. Without that inheritance, he didn't have any qualifications or right to be proud before these senior elite disciples of the Origin School. After a short while, when he didn't see Yang Yi, Yuan Xiu laughed coldly and said, "What? The first on the Ascension rankings and the Quasi-Sword Emperor doesn't even have the courage to meet me?" However, Yang Yi still didn't show himself. Yuan Xiu's face fell, and then he gazed at the elite disciple that led the group from the Sword Sect and said, "Jian Wuji, so this is how the disciples of your Sword Sect act? He doesn't even have the courage to meet me?" The young man called Jian Wuji chuckled and said, "Yuan Xiu, you're mistaken. Even though Yang Yi represented my Sword Sect during the Ascension rankings, he isn't a disciple of my Sword Sect. The enmity between him and both the Flower Palace and your Origin School isn't related to my Sword Sect at all. Feel free to go look for him. My Sword Sect won't interfere." Yuan Xiu laughed coldly and said, "It's best if it's like that, otherwise, don't blame me for not giving consideration to the fact that we're from the same territory." Jian Wuji smiled and didn't say anything. Right at this moment, a cold and gorgeous woman in a blue dress that led the group from the Flower Palace had suddenly stepped forward, and she glanced at Jian Wuji before she gazed at Yuan Xiu and said, "Yuan Xiu, Yang Yi is the son of a traitor from my Flower Palace. So, his life should be taken by my Flower Palace. What do you think?" "Oh?" Yuan Xiu laughed coldly, and then he said, "Yan Wu, Yang Yi has attained the enlightened sword heart and comprehended 4th-level sword intent. Moreover, he even possesses a mysterious king-rank dark beast. If you tried to take his life, then don't get killed by him in the end, because that would really bring extraordinary shame to your flower palace. A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of her mouth as she said, "Killed by him? So what if he possesses the enlightened sword heart? So what if he has comprehended sword intent? He's merely a first heaven realm profounder. Can he surmount a realm to do battle with me? Does he even possess the qualifications to accomplish that? Am not a disciple of your origin school." As she spoke, she glanced at Yuan Tong. Yuan Tong's expression was gloomy, but he didn't say anything. Indeed, the defeated had no right to speak at most times. Yuan Xiu glanced at Yuan Tong, and then he retaliated. "Even though my origin school's Yuan Tong was defeated, he was defeated after trying his best. On the other hand, your flower palace surrendered without a fight. If it's in terms of being humiliating, then it's probably your flower palace that takes the cake, right?" Right when Yan Wu was about to flare up, a woman from the Snow Palace that wore a white dress suddenly walked forward, and then she glanced indifferently at both Yuan Xiu and Yan Wu before she said, "Both of you make it sound like Yang Yi is someone both of you can squash at any time. If he attains the king realm, then just the enlightened sword heart he possesses would be sufficient for him to remain in an invincible state. How would the two of you kill him? How truly laughable." As soon as she finished speaking, she didn't say anything else before she led all the disciples of the Snow Palace onto the teleportation platform, and then they vanished from it. Yuan Xiu and Yan Wu had slightly unsightly expressions. They wanted to retort yet were unable to do so. Because the woman from the Snow Palace was right. Besides the martial god of legend, there was practically no one at the same realm of cultivation who could suppress one who had attained the enlightened sword heart. However, the person in the southern territory that was most likely to become the martial god had been defeated at Yang Yi's hand, so if Yang Yi were to enter the king realm, then could anyone in the king realm be a match for him? Yang Yi must be eliminated before he enters the king realm. At this moment, Yuan Xiu and Yan Wu had a moment of extreme tacit understanding as they simultaneously thought of the same thing. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and Yuan Xiu looked towards the place where the disciples of the ghost sect stood and said, "The ghost sect's Li Xianhe has enmity with Yang Yi because of the death of his brother. Why hasn't he come here yet?" The disciples of the ghost sect didn't dare ignore Yuan Xiu's question, and a disciple of the ghost sect said, "My ghost sect received news that Yang Yi has headed to the ancient battlefield by himself yesterday, so senior brother Xianhe has gone off in pursuit of him." "Yang Yi intends to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains to head to the ancient battlefield?" asked Yan Wu with a frown on her face. That disciple of the ghost sect nodded and said, "According to the information obtained by my ghost sect, that's exactly what he intends to do. Why is he exhausting such an effort to head to the ancient battlefield?" Yuan Xiu spoke in a low voice. After a short while, he seemed to have thought of something and sneered. "Could it be that he's afraid of us? So, he didn't hesitate to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains and travel to the ancient battlefield by himself?" "Perhaps," Yan Wu said in agreement. "Besides the Grand Qin Empire, he has offended 5 out of the 6 great powers. So, he's definitely aware that he wouldn't be able to live past today if he came here. Thus, he chose to travel to the ancient battlefield by himself. This Yang Yi is pretty smart." Yuan Xiu spoke in a cold voice. "Humph. It doesn't matter anymore because he still wouldn't be able to live for a few more days. With the strength and insane disposition Li Xianhe possesses, the Grand Myriad Mountains will be his grave. After all, Li Xianhe is already at the 7th rank of the King Realm, and he's even an existence that fought his way out of the Azura Purgatory of the Ghost Sect. It's definitely impossible for Yang Yi to surmount a realm of cultivation and challenge him. He's really getting off lightly by being able to die just like that." Yan Wu grunted coldly. "Don't worry, with how cruel and bloodthirsty Li Xianhe is, he wouldn't allow Yang Yi to die so quickly," said Yuan Xiu. "That's true," Yan Wu agreed. When Wenring Yu and Murong Yao heard the conversation between Yan Wu and Yuan Xiu, a wisp of worry had simultaneously appeared in their eyes. It was extremely normal for geniuses to be able to surmount realms of cultivation to do battle, because even they could accomplish it. However, this was towards a profounder that wasn't a monstrous genius as well. Just like them. It was probably impossible to find a profounder at the mortal realm who could defeat them. The difference in cultivation realms was extremely important when it came to a battle between monstrous geniuses. Yang Yi had once relied on the might of a Dao artifact to defeat Yuan Tong, who was at the half-step king realm. Yet now, Li Xianhe wasn't at the half-step king realm but a true king realm expert. Moreover, Li Xianhe had attained the 7th rank of the king realm. So, could Yang Yi survive Li Xianhe? At the moment that all the geniuses and elite disciples of the Southern Territory had headed to the ancient battlefield, Yang Yi was already in the Grand Myriad Mountains, and he was riding Gray that was dashing through a plain. The reason he hadn't taken the teleportation formation to the ancient battlefield was that had noticed that the little fellow was about to awaken. For the sake of avoiding any mishaps, had chosen to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains and head to the ancient battlefield. On the other hand, the reason he hadn't chosen to ride the Lightning Eagle was that he could practice his sword techniques while he traveled by land. Chapter 274 Assassination. 3 days later. Yang Yi's eyes were slightly closed, and the profound energy within his body circulated as he rode on Gray's back. Just like this, 6 hours had passed. At a certain moment in time, Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes, and at the instant that this happened, an enormous rock over 30 m ahead had suddenly and mysteriously exploded into pieces, causing rubble to fly towards the surroundings. As he thought back to how the rock had exploded into pieces, the corners of Yang Yi's mouth curled up slightly to reveal a slight smile. Since the beginning, had seemed to have forgotten what Elder Mu had once told him, the sword control technique stressed upon speed. Yet had unconsciously started to pursue usage of it that was magnificent and elegant. For example, during the battle with Yuan Tong on the arena, even though the scene of him commanding a myriad of swords was extremely magnificent, and the imposing aura they revealed was extraordinarily terrifying, the destructive might they possessed was very weak. Moreover, it exhausted a great deal of profound energy. The combination of the hidden sword and sword control technique was still extremely terrifying. If he was able to cultivate the sword control technique to the point it conformed to Elder Mu's requirements of traveling 300 m in an instant, then it would be extremely likely for him to be able to instantly annihilate Yuan Tong if he was able to take Yuan Tong by surprise. Besides the sword control technique, had bitterly cultivated the clone illusion technique had obtained from Yuan Yi and the dragon breaker technique. Both of them were extremely useful to him right now. Especially the dragon breaker. Because its might was truly extremely formidable. After all, had overcome Lin Ziyurin's infinite flash sword with the Dragon Breaker technique that was at the first level. The Dragon Breaker technique had 3 levels. With the physical body he possessed in the past, Yang Yi was unable to cultivate the 2nd level. However, now that his physical body had been tempered by the Nether Ghost flames, had attained the qualifications to cultivate the 2nd level of the Dragon Breaker technique. Yang Yi didn't dare be careless at all during his trip to the ancient battlefield. After all, it was where all the monstrous geniuses of Profounder Continent would be gathering, and he would never think that he was already the #1 expert amongst the younger generation of Profounder Continent. It was good to be confident, but if one was conceited, then one would be courting death. Yang Yi wasn't a conceited person. Right at this moment, Yang Yi seemed to have noticed something, and his pupils suddenly constricted. Right when he was about to act, a dagger that flickered with a ghastly cold glow had struck his neck. At the same time, a pitch-black figure that seemed like a shadow had actually suddenly appeared on Gray's back and right in front of Yang Yi. Clang! The dagger struck Yang Yi's neck, but his head didn't leave his body. Conversely, the dagger shook slightly, and the black figure was stunned. Obviously, the figure hadn't imagined that this would be the outcome. Right when the figure was about to launch another attack, Yang Yi had directly smashed his fist towards the black figure's face. The black figure didn't dare allow Yang Yi's fist to hit, and the black figure utilized the dagger to block the attack. Bang! The black figure was instantly blasted flying by the enormous force that Yang Yi's fist carried. Yang Yi stopped and gazed at the black figure that was 10 m away. Earlier, he felt a wave of fear after suffering the black figure's attack as well. Because this person's movement technique was truly too terrifying. If his physical body hadn't been strengthened again with Elder Mu's help, then the strike from before would have taken his head. I never expected that your physical body would already be terrifying to such an extent. The black figure was the first to speak and had a clear and melodious voice. It was the voice of a woman. It's you! Yang Yi spoke in a low voice when he heard the black figure speak. This figure was none other than the mysterious female assassin who had pursued him through the Grand Myriad Mountains some time ago. She didn't answer him. She remained silent for a short while before she suddenly said, You're in an extremely dangerous situation. Yang Yi was stunned, and then he frowned and said, What do you mean? The Grand Qin Empire, Origin School, Flower Palace, Ghost Sect, and Sword Sect have contacted the League of Doom in secret, and they have a sole objective, to kill you. The female assassin spoke in a low voice. The Grand Qin Empire? The Sword Sect? Yang Yi laughed coldly and said, They want to kill me? Why should I believe you? Moreover, it seems like you intended to kill me just now, right? If it was the Flower Palace, the Origin School, and the Ghost Sect, then Yang Yi would believe it. He would even slightly believe that the Sword Sect wanted to kill him because the Sword Sect's Taoist Zui and Yu Heng were truly not good people. However, he didn't really believe that the Grand Qin Empire wanted to kill him. After all, the founding emperor had just paid an extremely huge price to protect him, so why would the founding emperor try to kill him right after that? Unless the founding ancestor had gone mad. The assassin said, You must understand that the experts at the spirit realm and above are prohibited from entering the ancient battlefield. Even though spirit realm experts do exist there, certain reasons make them unable to make a move against the geniuses of the various territories. In other words, the ancient battlefield belongs to King Realm experts. Yet you Yang Yi are the quasi-sword emperor and possess the enlightened sword heart. Once you advance into the King Realm, then based on the relationship you possess with the 6 great powers, it would undoubtedly be a calamity for their disciples. So, they had to eliminate you, and now is the best time. Of course, they wouldn't allow you to continue growing even without this reason. You ought to understand the saying, those that aren't under my command should be eliminated. Yang Yi fell silent because the woman really made sense. With the relationship he had with the Origin School, Flower Palace, Ghost Sect, and the Sword Sect, those extraordinary powers would definitely not allow Yang Yi to grow. Even though the founding ancestor had included him under the protection of the Grand Qin Empire, while they couldn't do anything openly, wouldn't they still try to take his life in secret? After a moment of deep thought, Yang Yi looked at her and said, Why did you tell this to me? There isn't any relationship between us, right? The woman fell silent for a short while before she said, Some hope for your death while others hope that you live. I'm from the side that doesn't wish for you to die. When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment before she continued. Allow me to give you one last warning. Don't think that you're the strongest in the younger generation of the Southern Territory just because you defeated Yuan Tong and obtained the first position on the Ascension rankings. Not to mention the entire Profounder continent, just the Southern Territory has numerous geniuses that keep really low profiles. It wasn't a lack of strength that made them not participate in the Ascension rankings, and it was because their objective was the Hidden Dragon Pagoda instead. Yang Yi shook his head and said, I've never thought that I'm the strongest in the younger generation of the Southern Territory. In my opinion, the strongest in the younger generation of the Southern Territory or the stronger in the younger generation of Profounder Continent are both quite meaningless. Because we're all weaklings before true experts like experts at the Exalt Realm and Monarch Realm. That's for the best, said the assassin. Yang Yi suddenly asked. Who doesn't want me to die? I'm unable to tell you that, said the assassin. Yang Yi remained silent for a moment before he nodded and said, Since you're from the side that doesn't want me dead, then why did you launch a surprise attack against me just now? She said indifferently. If you weren't even able to withstand an assassination attempt from me, then there's no need for you to head to the ancient battlefield, and you should just look for a place to hide and stay alive. What you mean is that the League of Doom has sent assassins that are even stronger than you. Yan Yi frowned as he spoke. She nodded and said, "They've dispatched blood assassins at the King Realm. Moreover, they've dispatched more than one. 3 blood assassins targeting a single profounder at the First Heaven Realm. This is something that has never occurred in the history of the blood assassins." Yan Yi couldn't help but laugh bitterly when he heard this. The League of Doom really thinks highly of me. If it was a head-on battle, then Yang Yi, who possessed the Dark Beast army, would truly not be afraid of those blood assassins while he was in the Grand Myriad Mountains. However, the problem was they wouldn't fight him head-on. He was truly not confident in his ability to deal with these assassins while the little fellow wasn't by his side. Just like the previous attack from this female assassin. If her strength was just a little stronger, then even if he was able to avoid death, he would have probably been injured. Good luck. She spoke indifferently and intended to leave. Wait. Yang Yi stopped her. She turned around to gaze at him before she said, "What? You're heading to the ancient battlefield?" asked Yang Yi. She nodded and said, "The League of Doom will naturally be participating in such a grand event. Moreover, how could the League of Doom give up on the opportunity to fight for karmic luck in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda?" Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "No matter what, thank you for notifying me." Even though this woman had tried to assassinate him on many occasions, her actions this time were undoubtedly comparable to saving his life this time. After all, if he hadn't taken any precautions when so many King Realm assassins came to assassinate him, and coupled with the fact that the little fellow hadn't woken up from its cultivation, then Yang Yi would probably be in grave danger. So, it wasn't going too far to say that it was equivalent to saving his life. The woman was stunned. Obviously, she hadn't expected that Yang Yi would thank her. After all, she had almost killed him on many occasions. After a moment of deep thought, she said, "You don't have to thank me. It was someone else who wanted to notify you about this. If I'm not wrong, then they've already arrived at the Grand Myriad Mountains. Good luck." As soon as she finished speaking, she didn't stay here any longer, and her figure shook before she vanished mysteriously on the spot. After the woman left, Yang Yi took a deep breath before he grinned. He could avoid those assassins because all he had to do was summon the Lightning Eagle. After all, it was impossible for them to try and assassinate him while he was in the air. However, he refused to do that because only life and death battle would allow his strength and combat instinct to obtain an obvious improvement. Yang Yi was aware of his flaws, and it was that his combat instinct was too weak. Just like during the attack he suffered just now. If it was Yuan Tong who was the target of that woman's attack just now, then Yuan Tong would have definitely been able to rely on his combat instinct to avoid the attack. However, he was unable to do so and could only rely on his formidable physical body to resist it by force. Even though he still hadn't arrived at the ancient battlefield, based on the information had obtained from Elder Mu and the founding emperor, the youths who gathered there would definitely be extremely monstrous geniuses. So, he couldn't be careless at all. Moreover, he still had to look for the 9th Hell-Cold Gale. Thus, there was no time to be lost on his path towards improving his strength. Yang Yi let out a light breath of air before he placed Gray into the tiny vortex. After that, he dashed swiftly towards the depths of the Grand Myriad Mountains because he didn't want Gray to become a target of those assassins. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.